bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
All right, welcome. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah. All right. Tonight's going to be one of those shows. It's Tuesday, March 19th, 2019. 78 days into the new year, just 287 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? I am so excited about this show tonight. Riz Virk is here. We're going to be talking about his new book, The Simulation Hypothesis. So buckle up, kiddies. Seriously. Tomorrow night, JJ and Desiree Hertock are here. They've got a new book out, too. It's called Giza's Industrial Complex. That's right. Gas and electricity in ancient Egypt. It's going to be a great conversation. Thursday night is another Fader night with open lines all night long. Now, you can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio, Facebook, YouTube. Everything is Jimmy Church or Fade to Black. Let's go over to jimmychurchradio.com, and you can follow, like, and subscribe right there. Earlier today, I will just say this really quick. Earlier today, I posted over at On Stellar saying that I am leaving the platform. And indeed, I am. Okay. I am preparing a statement for everybody that will be published, and then I will read it on the show tomorrow night. But I have left On Stellar, and what appears to be with no explanation. Okay, there's so much more to it than you just leave something that you started, right? And it's not about that. I'm not abandoning everybody. It's just that we can no longer be associated with On Stellar, and it comes down to ethics and morals. And other things, okay? And we will always, on Fade to Black, Rita, myself, this network, and everybody that is associated with it, it's the community first, and we always run on the right side of the fence. And that is that. And so I will prepare something and get it out there for all of you. Okay? Okay. So now that is cleared up, not really, but it will be soon. Okay. All right. There you go. Let's see. At JChurch Radio is what you want to do. At JChurch Radio on Twitter. Hashtag F2B is the sandbox. Hashtag F2B is where you want to post your questions. And tonight for myself or Riz, post it right there. Hashtag F2BQ. That's the number 2, by the way. Hashtag F2BQ, Fade to Black questions. Hashtag F2B is the sandbox. We've got an amazing show lined up tonight, And I'm going to get to all of that in just a bit. Any questions or comments for this show tonight, too, you can also email directly Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Let's get to some breaking news. A U.S. jury today, are you ready? Found Bayer AG's glyphosate-based Roundup weed killer caused cancer. A blow to the company 8 months after another jury issued a $289 million verdict over similar claims in a different case. The case was only the second, are you ready, of around 11,200 Roundup lawsuits to go to trial in the United States. This is only number 2. Another California man was awarded $289 million in August after a state court jury found Roundup caused his cancer, sending Bayer shares plunging at the time. That award was later reduced to $78 million and is on appeal. Oh, man. Well, we knew it, right? You know what's funny? Today I was in our front lawn, and we've got a few dandelions, right? They're right there. And normally you're tempted, right? That's it. Ain't no Roundup at our house. I guess the dandelions are just going to grow. Got to pull them out. Got to pull weeds. Got to go old-fashioned style. But, it was just so funny. I thought, you know what, little dandelion? Just grow, flourish, take over the front lawn. But I'm not spraying Roundup. I haven't done it. When all of the Roundup years ago, it was about 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I think I sprayed Roundup once. And then I saw the documentary about the family with the back patio. I don't know if you guys remember that. But that was it. I haven't done it. Didn't throw it away, by the way. I didn't. It's just sitting in our garage. I couldn't bring myself to throw it in a trash dump, right? And to just throw it away. I don't know what to do with it. What do you do? What do you do with Roundup now? There you go. All right. Don't forget to download the Surfer Music Streaming app. SURFR. SURFR. Go to the banners at jimmychurchradio.com. Click on it. Download it. It's free. All you got to do is click. That's it. You're not sharing any of your information, your email. You're not going to do anything but just enjoy all of your favorite music. It's super easy. It's fun. All you have to do is download it and start listening. It's that simple. Get yourself the Surfer Music Streaming app. You can also go to surfer.fm, SURFR.fm. That's it. That's all you got to do. Okay, our next event is coming up. It is Contact in the Desert, May 31st through June 3rd in Indian Wells, Palm Springs, California at the Renaissance Indian Wells Resort and Spa. Tickets and info at contactinthedesert.com. I do want to remind everybody of our weekend there. Friday night, we will be broadcasting Fade to Black live like we do every year, so we're going to do that. Then Saturday night, I am going to be hosting the awards dinner. You got to get tickets for that. And so go to contactinthedesert.com and get your tickets for the dinner, the awards dinner. And I think it would be really cool if we had a couple of hundred Fadernauts, that if we also, and everybody wears their Fade to Black T-shirts, right? And we just flood. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. And don't you want to know who's getting the Lifetime Achievement Award this year? Well, you're going to find out. Get your tickets right now at contactinthedesert.com. And then Sunday night, I'll be hosting the closing ceremonies and the closing night panel, closing weekend panel too as well. So we've got a full weekend. Contactinthedesert.com at the Renaissance Indian Wells Resort and Spa. All right. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. It is just $2 per month. We have over 1,000 shows right there for just $2 per month. It's the best deal anywhere, right? All the apps that you need, anything, just click on the podcast banner. Everything that you need is right there over at jimmychurchradio.com. And don't forget to become a Fadernaut over at our membership section on the site. Everything that you need, autographed shirts, hats, all that stuff. Downloadable, commercial-free MP3 archives. It's all right there in our membership section at jimmychurchradio.com. And don't forget about all of our sponsors here. It's how this show happens. It's you and your support. Okay? So, Life Change Tea, Ancient Life Oil, New Mana Food Storage, and of course, Fade to Black Blend Coffee. The Surfer Music app. Go and download it. This is how, click on all of our sponsors. This is how this show goes on the air every single night. Okay? All right. Let's get the show cracking. Happy birthday to today. Bruce Willis is 64. And it used to be with Bruce, you would think of, Hans Gruber, right? Okay. So you had New Year's Eve. You had those kind of things. You know what? But with Bruce, you know where I go now? You know where I go? 12 Monkeys. I swear. That movie is so great. And that's when, and it's not anything else with Bruce. I go 12 Monkeys. Happy birthday to Bruce Willis. All right. Okay. On this day in history, sad day. We need a moment of silence, please. In 1982, guitar master Randy Rhoads is killed in an airplane crash in Leesburg, Florida, when their tour bus driver said he was a pilot, and they were at the tour bus company's headquarters to repair something on the bus, an air conditioner, and he took Randy up for a flight and decided to buzz the tour bus where everybody was sleeping, Ozzy Osbourne and Sharon and Tommy Aldridge and so forth. And then took a couple passes, and then the third pass hit the bus, crashed into a house, and they died instantly. And it was a tragic day. All right? So there you go, on this day in 1982. Fader fact. You are as old as the universe. You are as old as the universe. Why? Because matter cannot be created or destroyed. You need to think about that. I remember, I'm so fascinated with this subject, stardust, right? Stardust. That, and I've said it a few times before, but if you look, your left hand and your right hand are made from two different stars. Think about that for a second. That's just a heavy thought when you think about it. Well, matter cannot be created or destroyed. All of us are as old as the universe. Think about that. Tonight, Riz Virk is here. We're going to talk about his new book, The Simulation Hypothesis. Tomorrow night, it is JJ and Desiree Hertak and their new book, Giza's Industrial Complex. Thursday is another Fader night with open lines all night long. Now, I'm excited about tonight's show. And this show is about 20 years in the making because the film The Matrix came out in 1999. And I remember very clearly back then, I remember that up until the week of the release of the movie, I hadn't heard anything about it. And I am such a movie guy. And I would get to LA Weekly, and I'm always, waiting for some crazy movie to come out, and it's just something cool. And I was just always in their movie reviews, and across the street from the house there in Sherman Oaks, we had a really nice movie theater right there, so that's it. And I was always looking, and sometimes I planned for things a month or two in advance because something big was coming out, and The Matrix snuck up on me. And I had gotten out like the LA Weekly, and I see this review for this movie called The Matrix, and it was like the day before it started playing at the local theater across the street. And although at the time I didn't fully grasp what the review was trying to say about the film. And I'm pretty sure that the reviewer at the time didn't really understand what the film was about anyway, right? But I could tell that it was something that I wanted to see. Special effects and Keanu Reeves in the future, and there was probably some mention of alternate reality, and it was supposed to be so high tech and well produced, and I was like, okay, all right. And then it's playing like the next day, so I go and watch it, and I remember very vividly that I left the theater impressed, but I was impressed about the special effects mostly, right? And the other thing, because I'm such a film guy, was I was very impressed that I couldn't figure out what the movie was about, right? I was like, that was deep, and I didn't understand why. I couldn't figure out the meaning of the film. I knew it was much deeper than, like Neo dodging bullets, and slow-mo, and all of that stuff. But there was something else there. So I went back that week 2 or 3 times to see it again. And each time I took different friends. And I had to do that because you can't take the same friend to the same movie over and over and over again. Nobody's going to want to do that. So I invited other friends and told them I was going to go see the movie again. And I did. And slowly I got it. And you see, here's the thing, and it didn't happen right away. Not for me, and I can't speak for everybody out there, but I didn't get the film. I didn't get it. I mean, I knew, I enjoyed the story, and I enjoyed the action and the special effects, but I was trying to get to the meaning of the film. You see, here's the thing. Through that whole period of the 90s, I was really into gaming. I still am. I just don't have the time to game. If you ever get a chance, maybe one day, right in, if you ever get a chance, in my bedroom, right next to the TV is a PlayStation 4 sitting right there. Haven't fired it up in 6 months, but it's there. It's I've got all the controllers and all the things, but I just don't have the time to game like I used to. But in the 90s, I was really into gaming. And this is the trip with serious gaming. And if you have gamed, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't gamed, this may sound a little bit strange. But the more that you play, you find that when you have to go out into the real world, you find that you're still in the game. You do. It takes a while for your brain to adjust. It's a really trippy thing to go through, and all gamers do it. If you go through a 6-hour run and you've got to leave to go get food, or you got to leave to go do something, you got to go meet people, you have to leave the house, you're in the game. It takes a while. And the adjustment of your brain is such that you see things in the world around you that are relative back to the game that you were playing. You're still playing the game. And then when you get back home, let's say you adjust, you're back into the real world, you're hearing people talk and you're engaging in conversation and it's all good. Then you get back home and you fired up your computer, right? Or your PlayStation, whatever, and you're right back into that world. It's a trippy thing, and it's a comforting thing when you're gaming, that you get back into it. You get back into the world and all of the all the players and all of the things that you're interacting with and the things that it's comforting. And I understood that. I got it. And it was sometime later, when I started to, it was one thing to understand what the Matrix was about, right? Okay. It's another thing when the realization of what the Matrix and Neo were about, the real subject matter, everything changes. It does. There was something going on. And it's not that the Matrix was first to cover this. It's not about that, because we've experienced that in science fiction forever, and also mythology. But you know, if you think about anyway, before I go too sideways, when I got the realization of what was happening with the Matrix, I went out and I bought, when it first was released, because at that time there was a Tower Records, literally across my driveway from my house in Sherman Oaks, Tower Video. I got the DVD, right, with all the bonus, the making of the Matrix, the second DVD, and the director's cut and all that stuff. And I watched it over and over and over again. I went through a Matrix insanity. Not only the whole movie, because I would do that too, but I started watching specific scenes. I was understanding the meaning of the Matrix, and I would transcribe them. I would sit there on my laptop and watch these scenes over and over again, and I would get the transcription absolutely word perfect, every comma and period and thing, and I would study. I would absorb the movie by reading my transcription, which turned out to be the script. I would read that while the movie was playing in the background, and I got it inside of my head, right? I literally studied them. And when you go through this type of immersion into a subject, it will consume you. And The Matrix did for me. This was when I literally started to ask questions about the world around us. Not about conspiracies or UFOs and time travel. I'm talking about what is reality. That whole red pill, blue pill scene, when you break that down and the implications and the heaviness of that scene, today we understand it. We all know about being red-pilled, and we know about the words that were spoken, and we understand that scene. But back then, nobody did. We were absorbing it, and we were getting to the heaviness of what was actually being presented in the film, right? But I got it. And that being combined with the gaming that I was doing and the reality of what the Matrix was suggesting to us, it changed for me. And at the time, because today it's a different world, at the time, I thought I was the only one thinking like this. Okay? I really did. And I was uncomfortable with discussing these subjects. It was a movie, right? It was a movie. I was uncomfortable with discussing the heaviness of the Matrix with my friends because I didn't want people going, dude, what? Right? It's just a movie, man. It's just a movie. But in the early 2000s, many started to suggest the same thing. And what happened next? I started to research this, and I started to research scientific papers and physicists and what the simulation hypothesis really was. And it started to confirm a lot of things. And here we are today. About tonight, Riz Virk is with us. And probably 3 years ago, Silicon Valley started to flip on its head. And qubits and quantum computing started to become a reality. And when the talk of quantum computing, this is where all of this ties together, and it gets really scary. The thought of quantum computing started to get around the tech world, and we were trying to understand really what quantum was. And when you go from a 486 chip and you start to go through the different stages of what computers and processing power, 33 megahertz bus speeds and all of that from the old days, and where we are today, all right, and quantum computing comes into the mix, we didn't understand it. Now today we do. Silicon Valley did understand what quantum computing and quantum theory and quantum mechanics actually means. And then the suggestion started to come out. Are we living in a simulation? And then the references going back to the Matrix are everywhere now. It's part of pop culture. It wasn't always that way. For me, it took about 2 years of watching the Matrix over and over again and looking at the world around us, combined with the reality I was connecting with in video games. Tonight, Riz Virk is here. And we are going to go through not only each one of these, but like I said, I'm not the only one talking like this. Riz just released a book that when you read it, it discusses everything of the road that I just traveled since 1999. And it's exciting that today we find ourselves discussing this very subject. Is it scary? Is it any different? If you think about it. The scene in The Matrix, right? I know that the meat is juicy, right? But it's not real. If you think about that, that's where we are today. It's crazy. What's the difference? Does it matter? Would it matter to you? Think about that. Tonight, Riz Virk. Tomorrow night, JJ and Desiree Hertog are here. Thursday night is another Fader night with open lines all night long. Great week. This week here on Fade to Black, if you think about what we have gone through, are all of my favorite subjects, and you get to ride along with me. And it's an amazing time to be on this show and for me to do the job that I do. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Email is jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. You can follow me on Twitter @jchurchradio. All right, this is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. I'll be right back after this short break with our guest, Riz Virk. Stay with me.
This is Nicole Church, daughter of you-know-who, and you're listening to Fade to Black on JimmyChurchRadio.com and the Game Changer Network.
You're listening to Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
Fade to Black will now pause for alien identification.
The station that talks the net. KGRA Radio. When you take the beans from Central America with dashes of Indonesian and African mixed in and then roast it to the dark side of Fade to Black, you create the ultimate brew of fringe. Introducing the Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Yes, River Moon's darkest customized roast was created for the love of Fade to Black. The alchemy of masterful roasting and smoking the beans is in every sip of this full-bodied, dark Java. I need my coffee dark, deep, with distinct bittersweet chocolate highlights, just like the bunker. Leaning further into the darkness of the roast is Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Just click on the banner at JimmyChurchRadio.com and use the promo code F2BBLEND for 15% off of your order today. Go Beckley Teppy. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you can get our podcast for just $2 per month. All you have to do is click on the podcast banner over at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Hey folks, guess what the #1 phrase that Life Change Tea receives by email? You ready? We love this tea. We love this tea. Time after time, week after week, we love this tea. Life Change Tea gives you more energy, a beautiful cleansing, and fulfills its slogan perfectly. The tea that makes you go. So if you want to be on your health game, log on to getthetea.com and order Life Change Super Strength Tea. Packages come in a 1-month supply, and when you brew this stuff, wait until you see the results. Aren't we all about the results? And with a lot of people's health struggling, we can use a little bit of help. Doctors will tell you disease starts in the gut. So log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Be our next email saying, I love this tea. I love this tea. Get the tea at getthetea.com. Helping America one tea bag at a time.
9 out of 10 geneticists agree.
Fade to Black is not your father's radio show on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, The Planet.
Do you want to lose weight but have no idea where to begin? The Fast Start Diet, a 3-day weight loss plan, is the answer. 3 days of nutritionally balanced, calorie-restricted meals delivered right to your door. No shopping, no measuring, and no cooking. Everything is prepared for you and ready to eat at home or on the go. The Fast Start Diet has all the amazing benefits of intermittent fasting without starving. We've helped thousands of people who have struggled to reach their weight loss goals. Isn't it time we helped you? With the Fast Start Diet, you'll lose weight and feel great.
Find Fast Start Diet on Amazon or go to faststartdiet.com and use promo code TALK to get 10% off your first box. And as a special bonus, Fast Start will include their #1 rated Lipo3 appetite suppressant spray free with your order. This is Jimmy Church. And whatever your diet plans are, do what I did. Go to faststartdiet.com.
Hi, this is Rob Reiner from Anvil, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? I'm Chris. What up? This is Kyle Massey, and you're listening to Jimmy Church Radio.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Riz Virk, successful entrepreneur, angel investor, best-selling author, video game industry pioneer, and independent film producer. Riz currently runs Bayview Labs and Play Labs at MIT, a startup accelerator held on campus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Riz received a BS in computer science and engineering from MIT and an MS in management from Stanford's GSB. Riz's many startups have created products used by thousands of enterprise customers, and his games have been downloaded millions of times, including Tapfish, Bingo Run, Penny Dreadful. That's right. And Grimm, by the way, Cards of Fate. Riz is a prolific Silicon Valley angel investor, having invested in many startups, including Tapjoy, Telltale Games, Discord, Funzio, Pocket Gems, Moon Express, and many others. He has produced a bunch of independent films, too, including Turquoise Rose, Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? He did Sirius, and also the cult classic Knights of Badassdom, starring our favorite Peter Dinklage. Tonight, we're going to discuss his latest book, The Simulation Hypothesis, drawing from research and concepts from computer science, artificial intelligence, video games, and quantum physics, and referencing both speculative fiction and ancient Eastern spiritual text. Riz will tell us how all of these traditions come together to point to the idea that we may be inside a simulated reality, just like The Matrix. I'd like to welcome back to Fade to Black, Riz Virk. Riz, how are you, man?
Hi, Jimmy. Doing well. Glad to be back.
Well, you know, you would think when the intro music comes in that you're all pumped up. Are you pumped up? Does the music get you excited, Riz?
Yeah, absolutely. And your story of watching The Matrix, how many times, it also got me excited.
Well, you did the same thing. I know you did, Riz.
Yeah, yep. I looked up the dialogue and was amazed at, some of the things that Morpheus, Lawrence Fishburne was saying to Neo. And as I looked further and further into this, there was a direct parallel on it. Actually, there was an interesting story about this book and Morpheus that happened just last month, and I wasn't there, but I heard about it.
What happened?
Jacques Vallée, who is a UFO researcher, was part of Project Blue Book, and has been investigating paranormal phenomenon for years. He's excited about this book because he's a computer scientist by background. I think he was like the first person at NASA to map out Mars in a computer screen. So he was in Big Sur giving a workshop, and he put a couple slides up about my book and about the simulation hypothesis and how everything is information. And then they, the session ended and they went to lunch there in Big Sur. And who did they find at lunch but Lawrence Fishburne?
Oh, shut up. Okay.
No, so I heard about it from Jacques and from Diana Pasulka, who wrote American Cosmic afterwards, saying that was an interesting little synchronicity that happened around this book in The Matrix.
That's a trippy thing. That's when, things like that happen. You just need to step back and, enjoy the moment, but understand that things are not what they seem, man. They just are not. That's a crazy synchronicity right there.
Yeah, it was pretty unusual, and it's funny because I think the first time I was on your show, I was talking about synchronicity and clues, and we were using the term glitches in the Matrix for how these things are often related to each other in the real world. And then I think the second time I was on your show, we were talking about killer AI, and now we're kind of bringing it all together, as we talk about the simulation hypothesis. So it's quite an interesting mix of topics.
It is. And for somebody like you, Riz, that you get, you're supposed to get, I should say, you're supposed to understand software and computers and technology, and it's what you do, certainly with gaming and investing and apps and what Silicon Valley is about, also MIT, that you have a grip of what is going on. When the suggestion started to surface, not going back to the Matrix, I'm talking about today, where different scientists and engineers around the world and CEOs are talking about a real possibility. Stephen Hawking, for instance, right? Where they start referencing the possibility of us living in a simulation. Did that, how do you start to accept that? In that, you know what I mean? You're supposed to be smart, and you're not supposed to go down that rabbit hole, but yet others are around you in this industry.
Yeah, I think it's become a pretty popular topic within Silicon Valley, and it's become a serious subject for physicists and for philosophers and scientists. I mean, it used to be viewed as purely science fiction, right? And, we'll talk about some of the science fiction references with Philip K. Dick, in addition to the Matrix itself. But it's taken much more seriously now, and I think there's two big reasons why. One is there was a paper published by a philosopher at Oxford, Nick Bostrom, called "Are You Living in a Simulation?" And he did a statistical argument, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. But then the second reason is that video game technology has been developing at such a rapid pace over the past decades that we're getting better and better fidelity. And what we're realizing is we're creating models of the physical world inside the video game. And the more we do this, the more we realize that the physical world can be represented as information, right? And so, my background is in computer science, and a lot of the history of video games and computer science, I started programming on a Apple II computer, way back when. I think I built Tic-Tac-Toe as my very first game ever. And the history of video games and computers is all about optimization. You're trying to squeeze as much performance as you can out of the CPU, and then later GPUs were developed. In fact, a lot of the history of computer software is the history of video games. The first practical AI that was ever really developed was a chess-playing computer developed by Claude Shannon, who was a professor at MIT and a researcher at Bell Labs, and whom they consider to be the father of information science. So, and a lot of the optimizations that have been done for video games because there were so many pixels that had to be rendered that you had to have better and better processors. And so GPUs, which are used now for everything from simulating environments to video games to blockchain to everything else, the graphics processing units were developed in order to play video games. So really, video games are all about optimization. And as the representation or fidelity has gotten better and better in video games, this idea that we might actually be inside a simulation started to be taken more seriously. I'll tell you a story about my conversion experience, if you will.
Yes,
I mean, I've been thinking about this for a long time, but it wasn't until virtual reality really started to take off over the last couple of years that I started to say, okay, now we can see a direct path from today's technology to something like the Matrix. And so I was playing a ping pong game, table tennis game, with the virtual reality glasses. It was a firm in Silicon Valley up in Sausalito. And so I was using the controllers and I was playing ping pong against an imaginary opponent. And it was so realistic. I was so immersed with the way the glasses were and the way the responsiveness to my movements were, that at the end of the game, I decided, okay, I'm going to put the paddle down on the table and I'm going to lean against the table. And what happened? Of course, there was no paddle. It's just a controller. And there was no table.
Did you fall over?
So the paddle fell on the floor,
Right.
and I almost fell on the floor myself. And that's when I realized that immersion was starting to get to the point where we could fool ourselves. And we could fool our bodies and our minds into thinking we were somewhere that we really weren't. So that was one of my conversion experiences that I had around this topic.
I got so into, and so did Rita, we got so into Sims. I mean, really into Sims. And we're downloading furniture and houses and inserting that stuff into the game. Well, anyway, you get so into Sims and then go to a furniture store like IKEA and walk around, and your head is so twisted up. Everywhere you look, you're looking at furniture from The Sims, and you're thinking about your house that you're building in Sims, and you're looking at the people walking around inside of IKEA like the people that walk around in Sims. It's a twisted thought, but unless you've gone through your table tennis experience or gone through an experience like with Sims where you're fully immersed, you don't really get it. But you start to understand that a virtual world can be created and you can live in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, they've done research that shows that if you have a virtual character smile at you, that produces a very similar reaction to biochemical reaction to if someone was really smiling at you. And so the lines start to blur between the virtual world and the real world. And I didn't spend as much time with Sims, but I know about that. And I used to spend time in Second Life, which was also a shared virtual world. And you would go in and people would create all kinds of structures within this world. And those structures would live, while they logged out and other people would log in. And I remember thinking to myself, well, what happens to these structures when nobody is logged in? Are they actually there or not? And so then I started to get into the philosophical side of what is a shared online world in an MMORPG? Like, does it actually exist somewhere, or is it just information stored on a cloud server? And the rendered world, and this is a term I use a lot in the book, both for video games and for the world we see around us, the world is only rendered on my computer by my local processor, right? Therefore, the pixels of that world don't actually exist somewhere that we're all looking at them. So if you and I are logged into The Sims Online or Second Life or World of Warcraft, right, we think we're seeing the same thing, right? And the information may be similar, but it's being rendered by algorithms on our own computers. And so that's an interesting philosophical question. And I think it's something that if you think seriously about it, and we'll talk about quantum physics, a little bit later, but it starts to get into this idea of quantum indeterminacy and a subjective world. They've done research recently that suggests that there is no objective world in the quantum realms, that I could be seeing, 3 particles entangled in one way, and you could be seeing them entangled in a different way, and we'd be looking at the same 6 particles, which means that there could be slightly different renderings of the world going on, and we wouldn't necessarily know that because we can only see our rendering of the world. And so this idea of a informational world and a rendered world where our character lives, I think is one of the big metaphors that I explore in the book, and one of the big reasons why the simulation hypothesis should be taken seriously, I think.
Well, and that's the science side of it today, which I want to spend a lot of time talking about. But the other part is it's exactly what, when we get out of the electronic age or the computer age and go backwards, where you get into young and then start going even before that and get into different world religions and different aspects. This is exactly what they have been referencing forever.
Yeah, in fact, one of the reasons I'm a big fan of the simulation hypothesis is that science and religion have kind of gone their separate ways many times, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of academics and scientists don't take religion seriously except as a social construct. They've given up trying to explain any of the things that are talked about, on the religious side. But turns out the simulation hypothesis provides a scientific basis for a lot of what different religions have been telling us.
Right.
And it turns out it's not just the Western religions, but the Eastern religions. They both fit very well. I mean, I'll give you an example. So, I grew up in a Muslim household, and the Quran being one of the Abrahamic, religions with Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, they talk about the scroll of deeds, which gets recorded by these recording angels. And they sit there and they record every little deed that you do. And this is what they told us when we were growing up. And then later, after you die, you have to account for those. And turns out God shows you those deeds, and he shows them to you in a different way, because you may not be aware of how your actions affected other people. And so you can't just see a list. You have to actually see what the impact was of those deeds. Well, just last year, I was working with a startup that could render inside a video game in 3D from any point inside the game. So if anyone's played World of Warcraft or League of Legends, there's a 3D world, and normally you can only see your character's perspective. But we were able to put the virtual camera anywhere inside the game, so you could literally see what the game looked like from another player's perspective. So you could see exactly what you did to them. And it turns out, there probably aren't 14 billion angels, 2 for each of us. If all they do is record things, most likely it would have to be an AI of some type that's recording these, like a screen capture in a video game, and then you can play it back. And so, it turns out that a lot of what the world's religions were talking about was very similar to the simulation hypothesis. I mean, you had Daniel Brinkley on your show many times, and he and I have talked about this a lot. And when he had his near-death experience, he was shown a life review. He called it a panoramic 360 life review, where you would actually see the effects of your actions. If you punched someone or you shot someone, you would see it from their point of view. And the only way to do that is to record it in this kind of a 3D way, in the same way that we use screen capture within video games, and then to re-render it afterwards. So it turns out the technology of video games, explains pretty well, many of the things. And that's just one example.
Isn't that, couldn't you take like the example of heaven and earth, where heaven is presented as the real world, right? That earth is just is not the real thing. Heaven is the real world, and there's an example of if you're down here on earth, you're living in the simulation. The real world is heaven.
That's exactly right, and that's what the world's religions have been telling us all along, is that what we're seeing is more of a training ground, right? Where score is being kept, and we are being judged based on those actions in the real world, and we won't know that, until we die, and so consciousness is downloaded, if you will, to the body at birth, and then uploaded from the body afterwards at death, so you're back in the real world. And so what does that sound like? It sounds a lot like a role-playing game.
Yep.
Where you end up taking on a particular character, but a very immersive one, right? So it's very hard for us to remember these other realms while we're here. So it's a fully immersive game. But this idea of downloading consciousness is something that Silicon Valley is taking very seriously now, right? You have people who are talking about downloading your consciousness into a silicon device. Well, it turns out, the religions have been telling us all along, and particularly as you look at the Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism and that whole line, I mean, they've been explicitly telling us, you don't even have to draw an analogy. They've been saying that what we see is Maya or illusion, right? This isn't the real world. And the real world is beyond that illusion. In fact, in the Vedas, in the Hindu traditions, they have a term called the Leela, which is the grand play, a stage play, right? We get so caught up in the stage play of life that we're caught in this illusion of Maya, and we think we're in the real world. Well, obviously back then they didn't have video games, so a stage play seemed like a good good analogy. But today, if it's an interactive stage play with lots and lots of characters that are coming in and out of the play, it sounds a heck of a lot like a multiplayer online role-playing game where you take on these different personas and you download into it and then you download out of it.
What is it that we talk about it so often, Riz, about what the ancients knew and what we've lost over time? But when you go back and you look at the Vedic text or Sumerian text or what Plato wrote about and all of the other imagery from Greece and Rome and Egypt, where this conversation was pretty solid, about the possibility of not knowing what the real world is, that we are living in something else.
Yeah, and there's a very famous, allegory that Plato wrote about in the Republic of the cave, which probably many listeners have heard of. But the basic idea was, he said, if you're in a cave and you're chained to a wall, and you can't really see outside the cave, but you can see, from the mouth of the cave, you can see shadows of what's going on outside the cave. And, Plato used the analogy that is what we are like. We're like prisoners chained to the wall, and we only see shadows. So you develop a whole vocabulary for what is going on based on these shadows that we're seeing against the wall, but we don't know where the light's coming from. The sun could be outside the cave, and it could be causing these shadows and reflections of real people. And he also said that if someone were to escape from the cave, first, he would be blinded by the light, but then secondly, if he came back and tried to tell everybody that's chained up in the cave what happened, they would say he was crazy, right? Which is often what happens when somebody has an enlightenment experience and they feel that they've, glimpsed something beyond the illusory world around us. And so all of these traditions, this idea of, reincarnation as well, where you have a set of tasks that get built up. So, you mentioned that I'm a video game designer and I've been working on video games for the past 10 years. Well, most video games have this idea of a quest engine. And you have to go kill the Goblin King, or you have to go get this many pieces of gold, or you have to find this particular treasure. And when you complete the quest, you go on to the next quest. Well, if you look at the structure of karma and how it's described in the Eastern text, it's basically a way to keep track of these things that you have to do. So, they tell us in the Eastern traditions that we create karma with all of our actions. Well, how would that actually work? It would have to be stored somewhere outside the rendered world, and then we would have to basically, as we go through the world, and particularly as you go into the next life, you would have to then go and take care of that karma. So if you think of a series of quests that are there, it turns out, and in the book I have a whole diagram of what a quest engine would look like that could explain karma. It provides a pretty interesting scientific basis for this model that people have been telling us, all through the ages, that this is really how the universe works.
Yeah, I also look at it's a weird way to understand this, but if you look at a fish in a fishbowl, okay, that's his world. And we look out here, our living room, right? And you've got the fishbowl sitting on the coffee table. That fish, us out here in the living room, that's a whole nother dimension, right? He doesn't understand it. He didn't even see it. He doesn't understand. He can't relate to it. But you take him out of that fishbowl, he'd have a heart attack. He could not, you know what I mean? He couldn't relate to, well, we could be the fish in the fishbowl. and we could be part of that, and we don't understand really what's going on with this other dimension that could be outside of where we exist.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the fishbowl analogy is a good one because the material world being like the water in this case. And so, this is when, if you were to take a purely materialistic view of the world, you would say that there's just the water and nothing outside of that could actually exist. And you couldn't really figure out how this stuff worked. But we've had hints and clues all along. And, even as you get into the physics and you get into the biology, every field of science is basically finding that underneath it's all about information and computation, and it's not so much about the physical world itself. And so I think that's an important point. And that's why the simulation hypothesis, I think, can bridge the gap between these spiritual and religious traditions and the materialistic scientific point of view. I mentioned Oxford's Nick Bostrom. He says online that many times he's had friends of his who are university professors who are atheists who, after they look at the simulation hypothesis a little more seriously, say, well, maybe the logical thing to do is to be an agnostic, because anyone that was outside the simulation might look like gods or angels or super powerful beings to the people inside the simulation, right? From the fish's perspective, we can pick up the bowl and move it. What kind of beings are we from that perspective?
That's exactly
that's where the tie ties together.
That's exactly the point. I mean, how mind-blowing is that? Well, for us, moving the fishbowl is just moving the fishbowl. So us being the fish, not understanding who could be controlling us outside of our world, it's a fascinating thought. And if it's as simple for us to grasp about the fishbowl, then what would be the difference? The answer is nothing. There isn't a difference.
Yeah, that's right. And so things that look supernatural are actually just a regular part, of how the world works. I talked about downloading of consciousness. Since we're talking about the ancient traditions, I'll talk a little bit more about that. In the Tibetan traditions, they say that the world is like a dream, and this is an analogy that comes up again and again. And what is a dream but a mini simulation, right? When we're inside of it, we think that it's real, but then we wake up and we realize that it wasn't necessarily real. Well, in the Tibetan traditions, there's a whole field called dream yoga. And the idea is they train you to wake up within the dream and to realize that the dream you're seeing is an illusion. And that process is meant to then help you wake up in real life. Kind of, I guess, that would be the Tibetan Buddhist version of the red pill, versus the blue pill, to actually realize that what's going on around you is like a dream, and that the consciousness, there's a consciousness outside of it. And so this is why I like the video game analogy, because in video games you have a player and then you have a character, a PC, that a player character that you're playing. And so there's consciousness outside of the game and there's a player within the video game. Now, not everybody subscribes to that, right? Some people think we're in a simulation and everybody is just AI or simulated consciousness, right? And so that's a big debate within the world of the simulation hypothesis. But I tend to subscribe to and that's why video games is in this book. I really use my background in designing and creating video games. And I was talking about the Tibetan traditions. They also have what are called the 6 yogas of Naropa, one of which is dream yoga. Turns out there's a secret 7th yoga called the yoga of consciousness, forceful projection and consciousness transference. And the idea is you can actually, if you're trained to do this, and they keep it secret for obvious reasons, you can actually project your consciousness out of your body into another biological organism. So it's just like learning how to upload and download your consciousness. And there's a famous story of Marpa, who was a famous Tibetan yogi. His son fell off a horse and was about to die. He ended up projecting his consciousness into a pigeon that was nearby. The pigeon flew to India, and he then transferred his consciousness to a recently deceased younger man. They had these graveyards back then. They didn't always cremate people. And he basically transformed himself into a new body and kept teaching, that yoga of consciousness transference. So it sounds a little morbid, but it's not unlike what people in Silicon Valley are talking about today, which is saying they want to transfer their consciousness to silicon to try to get to this idea of digital immortality, transhumanism.
Yeah, let's take a break right here. Our guest tonight, Riz Virk, talking about his book, The Simulation Hypothesis. And, of course, you can go to zenentrepreneur.com. Everything is right there. The links are at jimmychurchradio.com. More with Riz after this short break. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us.
This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
This is KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, Salt Lake City, Utah, Van Buren, Arkansas. Introducing the new Surfer Music app. Listen, fade or not, you know I love my music. This is my go-to for all things notes. The Surfer app is a brand new concept in music listening. Surfer is free, providing unlimited access to thousands of live streaming radio stations. Surfer is an exciting, interactive listening experience. Discovery and surprise are built right in. Surfer is your destination to discover and rediscover great live streaming music. It features high-quality audio streams, free access to music from thousands of live streaming radio stations, unlimited listening, unlimited skipping. You get a music visualizer, and you can also select your favorite channels. Get it at the Apple App Store or Google Play. Just search Surfer Music or click on the Surfer banner at jimmychurchradio.com. Go Beckley Tepe.
Folks, this is very important information. What's to be said about CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. Our CBD is made from hemp and has 0.003 THC, which means this wonderful product won't get you high, no matter what amount you take. What does CBD do for the body? My hands are tied. But you can Google CBD benefits and be astounded. When you're finished reading, you'll want to log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. and purchase. Life is good when you feel good. People are tired of pain. People are asking for non-GMO organic products to help them with, you fill in the blank. Legal in 49 states, and again, our CBD is made from hemp. Ancient Life Oil is about helping people one by one by one. If you wonder how good the product is, the CEO takes it every day without miss. AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Have a great day.
You're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Hi, this is Ray Hobbs here, repping the planet, and you're listening to my good friend, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA Digital Broadcast Station.
This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to jimmychurchradio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier. And this is Ari Gold. We're the Honey Brothers.
Yes.
We are of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
Reclaim your active lifestyle with Angioprim. Angioprim is the original liquid oral chelation supplement. Chelation helps remove toxins, heavy metals, and cholesterol in your veins and arteries that can cause blockages. Scientific research proves the active ingredient in Angioprim has superior oral chelation action that helps promote cardiovascular health. Find out more. Go to angioprim.com. Talk to a trained consultant by calling Angioprim toll-free 877-882-7221.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you can become an official Fadernaut by just going to our membership section at jimmychurchradio.com.
Hey, it's Grace. Can we talk about something serious for a minute? Your age. Getting old has its perks. But remember, being a few years younger, You know, your hair was thicker, you didn't have so many wrinkles, that extra weight wasn't haunting you, and you just felt better. Well, we can't turn back the clocks and go back 10 or 15 years, but you can start feeling and looking 10 or 15 years younger with Nature's Youth RSF. It's a doctor-formulated daily supplement that helps your body maintain its peak performance and fight the aging process. Imagine sleeping better, looking better, and feeling better. See how Nature's Youth RSF has helped thousands of people just like you at naturesyouth.com. naturesyouth.com. Imagine how it will feel when your family and friends are asking you what you did to look so good. Your secret will be Nature's Youth RSF. It's time to start looking better and feeling better. Learn more and order your Nature's Youth RSF at naturesyouth.com. That's naturesyouth.com. That's naturesyouth.com.
Hello, this is Serena Wright-Taylor from Conscious Life Expo, and you're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church, who holds the Lucky Pony record for the best astrological chart since 1963. True story.
This is Micah Hanks of the Gralien Report, and you're listening to Jimmy Church on Fade to Black, across the globe on the Game Changer Radio Network and the one and only KGRA Radio, The Planet.
Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Riz Virk is with us, discussing his new book, The Simulation Hypothesis. You can go and order yours now at zenentrepreneur.com. The links for that are over at jimmychurchradio.com. And now, picking up where we left off, Riz, I want to really get into the science side of this. I think that everybody is waiting for, you know, the physicists and scientists around the world to step up and go, okay, it's all a simulation, okay, and here's why. But before we get to that, I want to throw this out. What if, because the consciousness side of this and downloading that, it's one thing with ones and zeros, but let's say that you exist in a simulated reality, right? And Riz Virk then goes in and downloads his consciousness and self inside of said simulation, right? Wait a minute. Are we creating some kind of crazy feedback loop? And then inside of that simulation, you do it once again, and you are now 2 or 3 times removed from what would be perceived as your real self.
Right. So it's kind of like a matrix, you know, within the matrix, right? This is something that I think is very, it's speculated a lot, you know, within people who like to talk about the simulation hypothesis. And, you know, in my book, I spent about a third of the book talking about the technology and how would we build the matrix. In fact, I had an article in TechCrunch today that was, you know, how to build a matrix, looking at the technology 20 years later. And basically, the first parts of that roadmap, you know, map pretty well to what we've already developed in terms of our video games, starting with Text Adventures, which came up with this idea of a world in the computer. Right before that, no one had ever really thought about that. And you had to use your mind to really visualize the world, right? Then we went to arcade games like Asteroids and Space Invaders. And, you know, I used to play on my Atari back in the early 90s. You know, I used to play these racing games, and I'd always wonder what was going on in that racing game beyond the racetrack, and the people in the bleachers, and I would see clouds and cityscapes beyond that and wonder, you know, what's over there in that simulated world. I don't know if you ever played Asteroids, but you could go off of the top of the screen and your ship would appear at the bottom of the screen. So there was a geometry to this graphical world which was being rendered with pixels, right? And then, you know, there's like 10 stages that we go through, but as we represent the world as 3D models, that's where the optimization comes in. We'll talk about that along with the quantum physics. But eventually, some of the later stages, to really, truly build a simulation like the Matrix, you know, we would have to fool ourselves into thinking that we are in the real world again. And so we would have to beam those pixels no longer onto a screen or even a virtual reality glasses, but we would have to beam them into the mind itself. And so mind broadcast, and then we would have to be able to get the responses back for what you want to do in that world. So we would have to read them. Now, in the movie The Matrix, right, when Neo woke up, he was in a pod which had a physical connection in the back of his head in the cerebral cortex. And that's how they jacked into the Matrix, was through the physical world. And so that's technology that people are still working on, this idea of brain-computer interfaces. But it's actually a pretty popular area right now, and more startups, including one funded by Elon Musk called Neuralink, and one in Boston called Neurable, and many others are starting to have technology developed. So, we would be able at some point within a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, to be able to create real simulations. So I call this the simulation point, and there's about 10 stages that I describe in the book to the simulation point. And once a civilization gets there, right, then we could do what you're talking about, which is I could then download myself into another simulation. Now, at some point, the resources, are limited, and this is where, as you understand the computer science, you realize that it's all about optimizing limited resources. And so, some people think that there is a limit to how much we'll be able to simulate if we're inside a simulation, because we only have the computing power of the processors that are running the simulation outside of the one that we're in, if that makes sense, right?
It does. But when you have, like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Brian Greene or Ray Kurzweil or Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, suggesting this to everybody, their words have weight, right? And the power of suggestion is very, very strong. And I have to ask, what is it that they know, that they fully understand and they grasp that we don't when it comes to the possibility of living in a simulation?
Well, I think, the physicists and the technologists, right? Again, these are considered separate fields, right? Computer science is one field, and physics is another field. But they're starting to see that they're actually related, right? And particularly with quantum computing, you start to see the convergence of basically every single field into computer science or information. There was a famous physicist named John Wheeler, right, who was involved in everything from the discovery of black holes to parallel universes and other things. And in his biography, he came up with this phrase, "it from bits," right? Where he basically said he went through 3 phases of physics in his long career. And he was, he was like the last living physicist to work with Einstein. And he said in the first phase, we all thought that physics was about studying matter, particles, actual physical objects. In the second phase, which was some of the quantum stuff that we'll talk about in a minute, he said, well, everything was a field. Turns out it wasn't physical at all. It was a set of probabilities. And then later, in the third stage of his career, he realized that everything was bits or information. It wasn't even a field. It was zeros or ones. And so, if everything at its core is basically information, then you can start to do things like quantum teleportation, teleporting, an object from one place to another. Right now, they've been able to teleport the quantum state of a photon or of an object somewhere else. But really, it's the information that gets transferred. And so I think when these physicists and these technologists are talking about this stuff, they're seeing that information is at the source of underneath everything, and that's why they're taking it so seriously, I think. And Stephen Hawking put it at about a 50-50 chance that we're living inside a simulation. Elon Musk says it's about 1 billion to 1 that we're inside a simulation, meaning that it's 1 billion that we are in fact inside a simulation.
Don't we expect them to be balanced? Right? You expect those very smart minds not to go in this direction. But for them to go in this direction so freely and to be accepting of this possibility really says something, and it scares us because you have the physical side and the information side, and you have the conscious side of things and consciousness. And is that the barrier? It's one thing to get to the ones and zeros of memories and stored stuff in our brains, but then we have the stuff that makes Riz and Jimmy. And how does that get moved over?
Yeah. So, again, it depends on your interpretation of the simulation hypothesis. As I said, in my case, I tend to view us as conscious beings outside the simulation who are playing a character within the simulation. Just like, going back to the Tibetans, when we dream, we have a body in the dream, but that's not really us, right? That's inside the simulation. Now, one of the reasons that, back in 20 years ago, and in fact, The Matrix came out on March 31st, 1999, which is literally 20 years to the day that my book is going to be released on March 31st in about a week and a half here. But, people didn't take it that seriously at the time because the technology wasn't there. So I mentioned earlier the Oxford philosopher named Nick Bostrom. So he came out with a simulation argument. Now, he wasn't really a video game guy or a computer guy. So, all the stuff I talk about, the technology, he doesn't really talk about that. But his argument was that suppose a civilization somewhere created something like the Matrix, a simulated world. In my parlance, I'd say they got to the simulation point. And he said, in order to have more beings, they would just need more servers. So you could literally have billions or trillions of beings within these simulations. You could have billions of simulations with trillions of beings inside them. And so if you counted up all the beings that were inside the simulations and you counted up all the beings that were outside the simulation, clearly the number of beings in the simulations is much more. Therefore, if any civilization ever gets to this point, right, anywhere in the galaxy, you could have a civilization that's 1 million years ahead of us that is able to create these kind of simulations. Then we are more likely to be simulated beings inside the simulation than an actual biological being. And so when he published that paper in 2003, suddenly, all these smart people at universities, etc., started to take this idea more seriously. And Neil deGrasse Tyson says, well, you can't really argue with the logic, even though it's a statistical argument. When I was back at MIT, we were taught that science is really about creating models of the world. And these models would have to explain what happens. We had the Newtonian model of the world, which was based on continuous motion and solid objects. And that worked for the most part, but it broke down when you were going really fast or if you went to really small subatomic levels. And then, Einstein came up with his theory of relativity, which works at fast speeds. And then quantum mechanics was a model that came up when you look at what happens at the subatomic state. But now this is a model, the simulation hypothesis, that I think explains many more things about the physical world and the conscious world and the religious and spiritual world than any model before. And so, I don't think a lot of the physicists are quite there yet, and a lot of the academics, right? They're willing to debate the statistical argument or the AI argument that we're all AI. I don't think too many of them are yet at the point of saying, well, we're really beaming our consciousness from another universe or another world beyond the physical. But they're getting there. And the more and more that they find information is at the heart of everything. And, I have been running a video game accelerator at MIT for the last 2 years. And, for many years, MIT had 4 colleges, the College of Engineering, College of Business, etc. They just introduced a new college, which is all about AI and quantum computing as a whole new field in and of itself. And they're recognizing that all the other fields are related to it.
What was the video game that came out, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, where you could go and visit any planet, and it continued and rendered in real time?
Yeah, so there was a video game called No Man's Sky.
Yeah, No Man's Sky
came out, and it had 18 quintillion planets.
Right.
And you could go to those planets and you could actually walk around in real time. Now, the team that built this, they didn't sit there and design
each planet.
Quintillion planets,
right.
Turns out that if you have 64 bits, and you say 2 to the 64th power, it turns out to be exactly 18 quintillion. That's why they had that many possible worlds. But what they would do is they would render the flora and fauna of each world based on different algorithms. And so many of your listeners have probably heard of fractal algorithms, right? And I've got some pictures in the book, and you can look online and you'll see that fractal geometry is a way of describing the natural world, which came out of this whole idea of chaos theory. And there was a guy named Mandelbrot who asked a question that said, how long is the coastline? Well, it turns out you can measure a coastline, at the level of miles and say it's, 100 miles long. But if you go in and you zoom in, you see that the coastline is actually kind of rocky and has nooks and crannies. So if you zoom in a little bit, it turns out it's longer than 100 miles. Well, if you zoom in again, you'll see even more nooks and crannies. And so the answer depends on what scale you're looking at the world. It turns out fractal algorithms are the best way to describe a lot of natural processes, whether it's veins or tree-like structures or coastlines. And so, many people have speculated that what nature really is a fractal algorithmic generating machine. And that's why there's no straight lines in nature, right? Everything has many dimensions, and so turns out that the same techniques that these guys were using in No Man's Sky to generate all the flora and fauna, there are people who seriously think that the way that flora and fauna and coastlines evolve in the physical world is again based on these algorithmic properties that nature is using algorithms. So you're kind of opening up the physical world and realizing that, oh my God, it's actually a computer program in there. And that's another reason why people are starting to take this idea more seriously now than they did 10 years ago, and certainly than they did 20 years ago when the Matrix first came out.
Yeah, and that would be an answer for the size of what consciousness would be, right? It'd be a huge number as far as ones and zeros go. It'd be a complex, but if it is derived in render, right, and with fractal algorithms, you don't need a huge everybody wouldn't be a huge chunk of code, right? Your reality in a simulation could be rendered as your day moves along.
That's right. And so, let's talk a little bit about how rendering is done in video games, right? So if you're in The Sims, right, you're seeing a room. Well, that room is a set of 3D models that describe the shapes of everything in that room, right? And then your computer renders that room from your point of view. So it only renders the things that you can see, right? So if there was a creature facing the other way, well, you can't necessarily see its face initially, right? You can only see its back. And if there was a flower, but it was underneath the table, you couldn't see the flower. Well, when people were first building video games, they thought it was impossible to render all the pixels that you would need for fully 3D environments, immersive environments. That's a lot of pixels when you think about it. Oh, it turns out Doom was the first video game that really was popular that was using this idea of a 3D perspective, and you could look around very quickly. Right? It was a first-person shooter, and it would adjust automatically, and that was because they rendered only that which is being observed. So that's kind of the golden rule when it comes to video game environments, is render only that which you can observe or you can see from your point of view. Okay, and so now we're getting into the physics, right? And so one of the biggest mysteries in quantum physics is this idea of quantum indeterminacy. And the idea is that
Say that again. What's the word?
Quantum indeterminacy.
Okay.
Which probably the easiest way to understand it, although physicists talk about it at the level of a particle, and says, where is this particle, and is it a wave, or is it a particle? But easier, I think, to understand it at the idea of Schrodinger's, infamous cat, right? Many of us have heard of that. And the cat is in a box that has some radioactive decay, and there's about a 50% chance that the cat is alive or dead. And so what Schrodinger said was, we don't know if the cat is alive or dead until we open the box. But it turns out the cat is both alive and dead until we open the box and actually observe it. Now, common sense would tell us that's not the case. Common sense tells us either the cat is alive or dead already. Just because we can't see it in the box, it has to be one or the other, right? Well, the quantum physicists have found, and this is like, a fundamental finding of how the universe works, is that until somebody actually opens the box and observes it, that the cat is neither alive nor dead. It gets rendered based upon who observes it at that point in time. And so that is also, the basis of what they call the double slit experiment, where they're shooting particles through these two slits, and they say, if it's a wave, it'll have an interference pattern, on this screen beyond the slits. And if it's a particle, it'll go to a specific point. Well, it turns out it's not until somebody observes it that it takes on a specific position, right? So before that, it's what's called a superposition, which means like the cat is alive or dead. And so, the big question in physics is why would the universe work in this way, that somebody has to sit there and observe something in order for the path of the particle to be rendered. And it turns out there's also something called the delayed choice experiment, where the particle goes through the slits and then it goes and does a whole bunch of other things. Like it could go up to a satellite 1,000 miles away, and only then is it observed. But turns out the path is not solid until the observation happens. Well, now we tie back to the rendering of video games, right? The cardinal rule was what? Only render that
what you see
is being observed.
Right.
And that turns out to be the cardinal rule within quantum physics, is only render that which is being observed, which, is why, the simulation hypothesis starts to make a lot more sense when you look at it in terms of quantum physics and how it works.
Let's take a break right here, and I'm looking at. It's so funny. I'm looking at the comments, and somebody just said my brain hurts. It's a heavy. it's a heavy concept, and one that isn't, for no pun intended, not that far from actual reality. Our guest tonight, Riz Virk. We're talking about his new book, The Simulation Hypothesis. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church.
You're listening to Fade to Black.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk. Jimmy Church with Fade to Black. KGRARadio.com.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires. This year we've experienced more than our fair share. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and last month I decided to make sure my family does not have to worry about food should we get caught in a real emergency situation. Introducing Numana, a healthy, storable product that tastes so good that you'll want to eat it every day instead of just during those times of duress. All Numana products have a 25-year shelf life, are MSG and GMO-free, no preservatives, and are made in America. With the Numana pack in your home, you'll be able to sleep at night knowing that you've protected your family. Not only have I tasted and tested, I own it. Now you can too. Just click on the Numana banner on JimmyChurchRadio.com and use the promo code Jimmy when you order. In addition to a discount, we'll send you an autographed Fade to Black t-shirt. Seriously. Go Beckley Teppy. Do you want to be an official Fadernaut? Of course you do.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black. Just go to our membership section at jimmychurchradio.com. Introducing the new Surfer Music app. Listen, Fade or not, you know I love my music. This is my go-to for all things notes. The Surfer app is a brand new concept in music listening. Surfer is free, providing unlimited access to thousands of live streaming radio stations. Surfer is an exciting, interactive listening experience. Discovery and surprise are built right in. Surfer is your destination to discover and rediscover great live streaming music. It features high-quality audio streams, free access to music from thousands of live streaming radio stations, unlimited listening, unlimited skipping. You get a music visualizer, and you can also select your favorite channels. Get it at the Apple App Store or Google Play. Just search Surfer Music or click on the Surfer banner at jimmychurchradio.com. Go back, Lee Tappy.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
You listen to us, and we listen to you. And so does the CIA. KGRARadio.com.
If you have hard water, the lime scale not only leaves white spots, it clogs pipes and breaks down appliances, costing you hundreds of dollars in energy and wear. Eliminate lime scale and other water issues like brown staining and bad odors with HydroCare water products, available from Wave Home Solutions. Wave's affordable water systems don't use salts or chemicals. You'll love the way your water tastes, smells, and looks. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
Are you intrigued by paranormal talk radio? You'll love the new paranormal radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the paranormal radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the paranormal radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
You are listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Oi, oi, I'm Riz Virk. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Welcome back to Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Riz Virk, talking about his new book, The Simulation Hypothesis, which is going to be released on March 31st, which will be the 20-year anniversary of the worldwide release of the film The Matrix. And you can follow Riz on Twitter. It's Riz Cambridge, right?
Actually, it's Riz Stanford.
Or Riz Stanford, Riz Cambridge.
It just depends where I was living when I created the account or the Gmail.
Where did I get Cambridge from? You use that somewhere, don't you?
Yeah, I use that in one of my emails, which I...
That's it. That's it. In another simulation. Yeah, in another simulation. Yeah. And I have... go ahead, Riz. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, speaking of email, I just got a note while... we were in the break here from Tessa B. Dick saying that she was listening to the show. And so I'd like to give a shout out to her. She's the wife of the late Philip K. Dick, and thought, we got heavy into the physics. Maybe we could step back a little bit to talk a little bit about some of the science fiction. And
let's do that. And I'll tell you why. And what's up, Tessa? She's absolutely amazing. Big shout out to Tessa. Okay, let's suppose something here. If one of the benefits of downloading ourselves or living in a simulation would be immortality, and I would say that would be, if I was a billionaire, I wouldn't have an issue with downloading myself into a robot, and living forever. But if that is the case, then why, if we're living in a simulation, why do we die in this simulation?
Well, that's a big, heavy, loaded question, right?
Right.
But if you look at video games, they have this idea of multiple lives, right? So you're able to go through a character, you're able to get to a certain point, and then the character can die in the game, because if there's no consequences of the actions, then you're not really taking that video game or that character's actions very seriously. So,
and we all do that when we upload a cheat, right? Insert some kind of infinite life cheat. The game doesn't have any more impact.
That's right. Exactly. At that point, the game becomes too easy, right? So it's the same with why many gamers don't like, pay to win types of games, right? If they just pay money, and then you don't have to go through the process of learning how to play the game and to really build your expertise. And so, as we get into the why, right now we're backing up from the science to the philosophy and the religion to say, why is that the case? Again, in most of the religious traditions, they talk about this being a school or a training ground while we're here, to learn certain things about ourselves and to evolve as souls, and keeping a list of all the karmic tasks that we have to do. Well, if there weren't consequences to what you did here, if there weren't rules that you had to follow, then we wouldn't take it that seriously at all. So that would be my answer for the why. But obviously, that's an area of a lot of speculation.
Would you upload yourself
into a...
Well, yeah, would you do it?
Into a digital device?
Yeah, would you do it?
This is an interesting philosophical question, because
it is.
The transhumanist movement, right, in Silicon Valley and beyond, is very much about how do I download myself onto a silicon device. The question is, with the way that we've defined bits, and I talked about quantum teleportation earlier, right, which was this idea of teleporting a particle from here to, say, in outer space. What they're really transporting is the quantum state. Like, that's as far as we've gotten. We aren't actually transmitting or teleporting the actual particle yet. So the question is it the same particle if it has the same quantum state? Nobody knows the answer to that question. So is it the same person if you were to simulate your consciousness and put it onto a silicon device, or is it a copy of your consciousness, right? And this is where we get into these debates about, are we conscious beings outside of our simulation, and would we just simply be creating kind of a snapshot of our current consciousness? So a lot of scientists believe that it's just a matter of simulating all the neurons. And there's a very big number of neurons in the brain and the connections between the neurons. And so far, like, there's a group at MIT and other places that have simulated the neurons of a rat's brain, which is, much smaller number of neurons and a much smaller number of connections than we have in a human brain. And so we haven't gotten to the point of having enough computing power to be able to do that. But they think that's all you need to do is exactly simulate all the firing of the neurons, and therefore you have that person living forever. But I think it's an open question as to whether that really is that person or not, or that's just a copy.
Riz, you dodged the question.
Okay, let's.
Would you do it? If everything was right and somebody said, okay, well, we've got 100% probability that you're going to be okay, do you pull the trigger? Would you go for it?
Well, I don't know, because I tend to already believe that we live forever outside of this simulation, right? So, do I need to be Riz Virk for the next million years, or can I go back
and reincarnate
the player that is currently downloaded into Riz Virk?
So right? Your answer is no, you wouldn't do it.
My answer is probably not. Yeah, I don't think it's quite as easy as these people think. Okay, getting back to science fiction, there was a great show a few years ago called Fringe.
Love it.
I don't know if you saw that.
Yep.
And they had this idea of parallel worlds, and if we want to get more into physics, we can talk about parallel worlds. But at one point, they were trying to transmit William Bell, who was a character played by Leonard Nimoy, his consciousness onto a silicon device, right?
Which they did. They actually did. And if you remember in Fringe, let's stay focused on this. You remember they did about a half a season in animation.
Yeah, they did.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember the animation part.
It was a cartoon. It was actual. They were living in a simulation. They were living in a cartoon, and just straight out of Warner Brothers, right? Disney.
Yeah.
And William Bell's character, Leonard Nimoy. And by the end of the season, when they finally got out of the simulated world, you were so acclimated to it that you didn't mind it not being, and it was really, really, really well done, that concept.
It was, and I think they were one of the best representations of parallel worlds. But if you remember, when they tried to download his consciousness onto the silicon, it actually didn't work. What happened was his consciousness got downloaded to the nearest biological entity, which was the character Olivia Dunham.
Yes.
Right? And so she ended up being William Bell, right? Pretty
speaking,
good,
and it was well done. She was speaking like Leonard Nimoy. It was pretty cool.
Right. And so now we're tying science fiction back to this idea of downloading of consciousness, back to the Tibetan yogis that I talked about earlier, which they were able to download their consciousness onto another biological entity. So I think we're a little bit further away from being able to download our consciousness into a silicon device than many people think. But, as we start to think of biological computers, that's where it starts to get interesting, and that's where it seems to be more consistent with what the ancient traditions have been telling us as well. So, I probably wouldn't, but even if I did, I think it would be, this question of whether it's really me or a copy of me is an interesting one, right?
Well, it would be a way to solve traveling to the stars and interstellar travel. If you could exist, in that world where you don't have to worry about food, water, oxygen, and dying for that matter.
Right. So on the one hand, it becomes a way for us to travel to stars if it's going to take so long to get there. And, a big part of the book also talks about different science fiction. And, there was this Netflix series that some of your viewers may have seen or listeners may have seen called Altered Carbon.
Loved it.
Which was based on a series of cyberpunk novels.
That's right.
And they had what they called a stack, which was a cortical stack that was stuck into the back of your neck, and your consciousness could be downloaded. It was in that stack, so you could pull it out and put it into another body, and you were now inside this other person's body. So you start to get into this idea of what is really you. Is it the information stored in this device? And they would beam themselves right to another planet. That's how they traveled to another planet quickly. Was that they would beam themselves into another cortical stack because it was just information, in that device, and then they would be in another body and they're automatically. And so that's how they got around this problem of, it takes so long to try to travel between stars.
Well, and staying on the science fiction side, because when you look at not only Philip K. Dick, who absolutely wrote short story and novel after novel about exactly this. Not only simulation, but parallel worlds. And right now we've got, what's that new series? The Man in the High Castle. right? So that's out there. We've got Counterpart.
That's right.
Counterpart, which is really, really good. I don't know. It's on Showtime or HBO. I can't remember. And we just finished.
It's on Stars. Yeah.
Yeah, Stars. It's on Stars, and it's really, really good. You just mentioned Fringe, and then we're talking about The Matrix, but we can go all the way back to the holodeck. Right, and living in, and the way that Orville presents it, they've got the simulation room. So it seems,
In fact, that's when I first started to think a little bit more seriously about this. Was when I saw Star Trek and the holodeck, and there was one episode early on. I remember it kind of blew my mind, where they were doing a Sherlock Holmes simulation in the holodeck, and one of the characters, who was based on Professor Moriarty from the original Sherlock Holmes novels, he realized that some of the people in the simulation were not from the holodeck, and that they existed out there, outside the holodeck. So he actually realized that there was a world outside the simulation, whereas the rest of the characters were AI. So in video games, we have this idea of player characters, which we've talked a lot about, but we also have this idea of NPCs, or non-player characters, who are the AIs within video games and people we can interact with. And so the holodeck characters were kind of like NPCs, but this NPC was smart enough to realize that there was a world out there, and he wanted to go out of the holodeck, but he couldn't because he was just an NPC. And that gets back to this debate of whether we're AI or we're actually conscious beings playing a character in it. Now, I don't know if you remember in Star Trek, there was another episode with him in there, but basically they took him out of the holodeck, and so he thought he was in the actual ship, but turns out he was in another simulation, and that's how they kind of kept him alive, within that. And so it's a very common concept within a lot of science fiction, but that was one that really got me thinking about, what if we're inside a holodeck? Could we realize that there's this world, outside the holodeck?
And you just mentioned AI, and AI has gotten to the point now here in 2019 where I don't even think that we thought that we would be here 2 years ago, where AI is really starting to we're getting out of general intelligence into some pretty frightening levels of AI. And is that part of the simulation and living in that world? And if we get to that point where the Turing test isn't even mentioned anymore, right?
And so for people who don't know what the Turing test is, it's Alan Turing was a mathematician, computer scientist, in England, and he came up with this idea of a game where behind a curtain there would be a computer, and there would be a real person, and you would send messages back and forth between yourself and person or A versus person B. And if you could not tell which one was the computer and which one was a real human being, then AI would have gotten to the point where it can basically impersonate a human being. We're not there yet, right? We haven't yet passed the Turing test in a generalized way. But one of the 10 stages that I lay out in the book of getting to the simulation point is AI, and it's this idea of being able to simulate realistic characters, within the simulation. And then the second part of that is, if they're realistic characters, can we also have false memories as well, right? And that's an area where Philip K. Dick's work is quite interesting, and Stephen Hawking talks about this idea of within a black hole, information sometimes goes in and doesn't come out. And so he says that means determinism breaks down, and if determinism breaks down, we can't know our past, which is basically the same as false memories or implanted memories. There's a great scene in the Blade Runner in adaptation of Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, where there's an android and she doesn't know she's an android because she has real memories, right?
And that scene, speaking about this in The Matrix, where Neo's walking down the street in the crowd, and the lady in the red dress walks by. She's right. She's an NPC, and what's his name? What's his name that creates her? I forget his name.
I forget his name as well. Yeah.
What's his name? Rat? Oh, man. Anyway, he goes, you want to meet her? Right? And that's an example of an AI that would be needed in a simulation world like this, which is presented in the Matrix.
That's right. And so those AIs, we're getting closer. I don't know if you saw this, but recently they had these virtual influencers, very popular in Asia, where there are YouTube videos being made by these virtual characters. And in China, the state news agency released a virtual news anchor who can basically read the news, and it looks like an actual person. I mean, we're far from Max Headroom right back in the 80s. But actually, it's very hard to tell that this isn't a real person that is reading the news. Now, in this case, it's not full AI because it's just reading the news. But we're getting there. And in the Matrix, AI is a big part of that movie and the mythology around it. In fact, Agent Smith, right, is basically an AI, the computer program, who basically decides who's there to try to keep order in the Matrix. But I forget which movie. It was maybe the second movie where he projects himself onto all of the people in the Matrix, right? Remember that?
Yes.
Where everyone looks like, who is it? Hugo Weaving, I think, was
Agent Smith.
The actress, Agent Smith. And so it's an agent that's replicating itself, throughout the simulation. And so, AI is very much, a fundamental part of being able to create realistic simulations that are indistinguishable from reality. But also, I mentioned the simulation argument, which is all about AI, which is the fact that all the beings inside simulations are actual AI and not biological beings. I don't personally buy that side of it, but the fact that we could be interacting with people and the fact that we might have memories that are false that have been implanted using code or data, and we're getting there. So at MIT, there was a group in the brain science group where they were able to implant a false memory inside a rat using electrical stimulation. Now, this is just the memory. It's a false memory of, whether you should go left or right. So it's a very simple thing. But they said the neurological structure of that false memory was actually very similar to what a real memory would look like. And so, we're still years, if not decades, away from being able to do that. But if we get to that point where we can place false memories, who's to say that a more advanced civilization hasn't already done that? Just like going back to the Tibetan traditions, in a dream, we've all had dreams where we remembered stuff. Then we wake up and you realize that's not a real memory. That was a memory from within that dream world and of that character. It's like the backstories, in NPCs within video games that can be like false memories. And so, it's all related to this idea of virtual characters and what's real and what's not. And that's, what's great about Philip K. Dick's work is it was very much, and when I interviewed Tessa, she said it was very much about what is real and what isn't. And she mentioned that with The Man in the High Castle, he actually remembered a timeline where the Axis powers won the war. And she said that he believed someone rewound that simulation because they didn't like that result and then got us on our current timeline. Well, if we're in a simulated reality, then you can do things like that. You can rewind the timeline and then forward it again. And I have the transcript, of our interview up. If somebody just does a search on Philip K. Dick, The Matrix, a conversation that I had with Tessa, and she talks more about that.
Now, what would happen? How would we discover that we are actually living in a simulation? Would it be a glitch in the code? Something that we could react to? Would that be free will? You know what I mean? That would take us off of the said code of the simulation and then would reveal itself to us, and then we could react to it in a free will sense because we're rendering in real time, right? Would that freak us out?
Well, I think that would, and that's, I mentioned, Jacques Vallée earlier, and, he believes, as many people do, that synchronicity is like a glitch in the Matrix, and that it's stored based on association, right? That information, when you store information in the database, you store it based on how things are associated. And so, these are like little glitches in the matrix. And some people believe the Mandela effect is basically evidence that reality can be unwound and then we move forward. Now, I don't know if you've seen The Adjustment Bureau.
I have.
Which was based on, Philip K. Dick's short story, The Adjustment Team. And in that, they what happened was they froze like an entire building in the story itself, and then they changed people's memories, and then they forwarded those characters. So those characters only remembered the new way. They didn't remember what had happened before, but the main character was supposed to be in the building and he wasn't. He walked in on them while they were adjusting everybody, and he remembered both the old way things used to be and the new way. And it's slightly different from the movie, but this is from the actual novel itself. The short story itself. And that was, a case where you've got someone remembering something that's different from what everybody else remembers. So it gets back to this idea of false memory. So that's one way of detecting it. Another way is that there's a series of physicists who believe that, as we do more delayed choice experiments, so there's a physicist named Tom Campbell who wrote a book called My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything, and they are doing some experiments with some folks at Caltech to show that in fact the world is rendered only when we observe it. That's been true at the subatomic level, but they wanted to do a series of experiments which build on the delayed choice experiment I was talking about earlier, where you don't make the choice until 3 steps down the road. And so if they can verify that all those 3 steps aren't rendered until the choice is made, they believe you can prove that it's just like a video game. So that's another way. Now there's yet a different way. Some people believe we can detect that we have pixels. Right, so pixels are the basis of rendered worlds in our video games, and so the question is the physical universe pixelated? Right. And many people think that it is. I remember first hearing about Zeno's paradox, right, which is a Greek philosopher who had many paradoxes, but one of his main paradoxes was with Achilles and a tortoise. And he said if Achilles needs to catch up to the tortoise, first he has to get halfway to, between himself and the tortoise. And then he has to get halfway between that, and then halfway between that. And so if distance was continuous, you could always go halfway, and you would never quite reach it. The same idea of how do you actually touch the wall with your finger, because you always have to go halfway. And so at some point, there has to be something that says, okay, you've gone over the smallest possible limit to fill the gap. Otherwise, you would just keep going half and half and half forever ad infinitum. And that smallest point would be like a pixelization of space. And it turns out there is a value like that. It's Planck's constant. And below that value, they can't measure anything. So nothing is reliable. So it's considered kind of the smallest measurable value, but it's based on the speed of light. That's how he derived, that specific value. And so if we think of pixels in a video game, they're individual pixels that are lit up, right, based upon some information that's stored in the computer that says, I'm in the house, and the models say I need to render this specific set of pixels. And so some people think we can detect the pixels by looking at the structure of space. So that's yet another way to try to detect, if we're actually inside a computer simulated world. Some people think fractal algorithms are evidence of computation there.
Yeah, I saw this debated with Brian Greene. And the evidence presented forward about us being pixels all the way around, everything that you look, it was fascinating. We're going to continue this conversation with Riz Virk right after this short break. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us.
Hi, everybody. This is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
This is KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station. Salt Lake City, Utah. Van Buren, Arkansas.
Poor water quality is a major health issue, and it's only getting worse. Municipalities can't keep up, standards have dropped, and pollutants are increasing. Where does it all end? It ends by keeping the pollutants outside of your home with HydroCare's advanced systems available at Wave Home Solutions. No less than the best purification materials and processes have been developed by HydroCare to provide you with healthy, clean water for drinking, cooking, and showering. HydroCare far surpasses the competition in removing chlorine, odors, iron, lead, chemicals, limescale, and much more. Don't settle for less when it comes to your water. We'll take care of the toughest water problems for you, whether it's from a city or well source. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, call 888-997-WAVE. That's 888-997-WAVE. Or go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
Your contact for current news and trending topics. KGRARadio.com.
Does your basement or crawl space have a damp, musty smell? Well, watch out. That's a sign of too much moisture and not enough ventilation. And that can mean increased mold growth and the buildup of harmful toxins and gases. Don't bother with a dehumidifier. It just circulates the same unhealthy air. Now there's a better way to remove these dangers and odors. It's with the computerized Wave Moisture Control Unit that reduces moisture and expels pollutants.
We replaced our old dehumidifier with the Wave unit, and in only 3 weeks, our basement is dry and the musty smell is gone.
Wave units require no maintenance, no buckets of water or filters, and costs only pennies a day to run. Breathe better, live healthier with an affordable, no-maintenance Wave unit. Call 888-717-WAVE, 888-717-WAVE, or visit dryhealthyhome.com. Dryhealthyhome.com.
Ride the Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and I only drink Fade to Black blend coffee from River Moon. Just click on the River Moon Coffee banner at jimmychurchradio.com. Promo code F2B Blend.
So are you tired of being tired? Well, then it's time to get the tea. Hey, it's Lisa here to tell you about this all-natural, all-organic tea I've been drinking that has had great results for over 20 years. It's called Life Change Tea, and it's specially formulated to help detoxify and cleanse your kidneys, liver, colon, and blood all at once. The colon is one of the most ignored organs in the human body. The faster that waste is eliminated from the body, the less time that waste sits in our intestines, spreading toxins to our bloodstream. This tea helps cleanse chemicals caused by outside intruders from our entire digestive system. And get this, weight loss can be a side effect. And with continued use of the tea, you can experience clearer, healthier, younger looking skin, increased energy, and a happier outlook on life. So if you're tired of being tired, get the Life Change Tea at getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. And like me, you'll be glad you did.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of Fade to Black by just calling 605-562-4482. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Just call 605-562-4482. You can listen to me, Jimmy Church, on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Go Beckley Teppy.
You want to know a secret? I love ponies. I really love ponies. I'm serious. I couldn't stay sane without ponies to brush.
Why Fade to Black? Because you never got that pony, damn it.
This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Okay, a couple of updates. His name was Mouse. It was not Rat in the Matrix. His name was Mouse, so I got that up. And then also over in Twitter, everybody's, I don't remember the animation episodes of Fringe. All you got to do is look it up. I just posted a picture. Here is Leonard Nimoy, and there's a still from some of the episodes of Fringe that were in animation that were incredible. All you got to do is search it, Fringe animation episodes, and you'll get thousands of images, but there's one there. And I wanted to say this. This is where I want to go next. Some of the philosophical sides of the simulation hypothesis. At Universal Studios here in Los Angeles, Riz, in City Walk, they used to have, they don't have them anymore, but for years they had these 4 virtual roller coasters that you could ride. And one was like in a mine shaft, and one was in outer space, and one was, whatever, and one was traditional. But they were free. If you went, paid for City Walk, you could ride these, right? And me and my friends, we would just ride them one after another. We'd come off. And it was virtual. You're sitting in a chair that's moving, right? And you've got this 3D surround of this roller coaster and the noise and the clanking and everything. But I didn't care. It wasn't a real roller coaster, but it was just as exciting. It felt real, right? It felt real. Now, if we're living in a simulation, do we care?
Well, that's an interesting question, and that reminds me of the Back to the Future ride at Universal Studios in Florida, which I don't know if they still have it there, but you were in, the DeLorean, and you were basically, it would move left and right. So it has kind of what we consider haptic or kinesthetic responses, kind of like in a movie theater where they've got the chairs that vibrate, and there's an explosion on the screen. And so, I think our technology, and I'm a video game guy, and our technology is getting to that point where, I mentioned the ping pong game earlier, where I thought I was really there. But if you look at something like Ready Player One, the movie that came out from Steven Spielberg last year and based on the book by Ernest Cline, they would wear haptic suits while they were inside the virtual reality, right? So they could feel if they were being punched, and they would be on these treadmills, these omnidirectional treadmills, so they could feel like they were actually moving. And many people preferred the reality inside the Oasis, to the physical reality that was described in that novel, which is kind of a dystopian future. And so, it's an interesting question.
What does it matter? What does it matter? If you feel the same emotions, you're still dealing with the implications of breaking the law or murder or morals and ethics and, of course, food and experiences and dreams and everything. What would it matter? Should we care? Would you care?
I personally would, but it's a question that many people ask, and it's one of the areas that in the simulation hypothesis you get a certain percentage of people. So I get interesting reactions when I talk about this. Right, there are some of the scientists who say, "Oh, that's just like religion. Therefore, we don't want to take it seriously." And then sometimes you go far on the religious or consciousness side, and they say, "Oh, that's just AI, and we're not AI. We're conscious beings. Therefore, we can't take the simulation hypothesis seriously." And it's when you've got both sides kind of unhappy with it that I know we must be onto something here. that we're really bridging this gap. But then a third reaction sometimes is, well, what does it matter? Let's forget about it. But wouldn't you want to know if you were inside a holodeck, right, to know that there was an actual spaceship Enterprise outside the holodeck? I think it can give you a sense of perspective, not unlike, what people who've had a near-death experience, right? They get a perspective on what's going on in their lives, and it helps them to act a certain way and helps them to make progress in the video game. If you were inside a video game, wouldn't it help you to know what elements were being used to keep score and what your quests or achievements are, versus thinking it's just all pointless? So I personally would want to know, but maybe not everyone would want to know.
If the universe is math, right? That's all it is. The universe is nothing but math. And things are going to happen the way that they're going to happen, which brings up the question of free will and or not, that everything is predetermined. And if that is indeed the case, now we are talking about numbers, and what we are doing right now can't be anything but a simulation.
Right. So this gets back to that kind of central debate amongst simulation theorists. I don't know if there actually is such a term, but there are certainly people that love to debate this stuff online, that whether we are, in fact, AI or not. And this is where we're tying to this idea of why do you need a computer simulation for anything? And there's a concept called computational irreducibility. And, this was popularized by Stephen Wolfram, who created the Mathematica software. But, it's been around for a while, and it ties into ideas of chaos theory. And chaos theory came about because people realized that even if you have a purely deterministic model that says, a set of equations, x equals x plus 1, and you keep running it again and again and again. For you to know what is going to happen at the 50 millionth step, you can't just calculate it. You have to actually run the program 50 million times, and that even a slight change in the input variables can result in a vastly different outcome. This is when people try to predict the weather, for example. This is why they were so bad at it for a while, but as computational power started to get better, they've started to become better at predicting at least within a few days, right? We still can't predict what the weather's going to be like a year from now exactly on this day at this time. That's because there's so many variables to simulate, but it's a computationally irreducible problem in that you have to compute it. And so if that's the case with the simulation, even if we're in a simulation where the initial variables are determined, the reason you run the simulation is you need to account for little minute changes to see where they would end up. And to a certain extent, this is what Tessa was telling us about Philip K. Dick, where he believed that there were some beings, whether they were from the future or who knows where, they would run the simulation to see where it led, and then they say, well, they weren't happy with an outcome, and they would rewind the simulation to go in a different direction. So there has to be some element of randomness or free choice there. And, I tend to believe that just like a video game, there may be limited choices, but you are free to kill the orc or not in the video game. So the player who is controlling the character does have the option of changing things, and that leads to a different result in the simulation itself.
Well, if we accept the simulation hypothesis, let's go there for a second and let's table that. Then the question of parallel worlds and the multiverse, the one aspect that is always up for debate is the physicality of said parallel world. How could that be possible? An alternate timeline that's just like our world, but it's just a little bit different, but it exists. Well, that would answer the physical side of it, right? That It's just a simulation. It's not a physical parallel world, and the multiverses that would be out there. It's just a simulation.
Right. So if you think about if the parallel worlds or the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics is that every time there's a choice, or the universe is actually branching into two different universes, and then you have another choice and it's branching into two different universes.
Right.
On and on and on. So there's an almost infinite set of worlds. Now, Stephen Hawking said it's not infinite because there are only so many particles that you can arrange in so many ways, but it's a very large number in any case. Well, turns out the only way to do that, you would have to clone the existing world, right? Our physical world, and then have it go off in a slightly different direction. Then you would have to clone that again. Now, that's pretty easy to do on a video game server, right? We can clone, we can take a World of Warcraft server and say, this is the status. and let's make another copy of it on another server. And then we can let that run independently so that then people can make different choices. But in fact, in computer science, this idea of copying pixels and copying information, it's a basic operation that can be done very fast and very quickly. So the only practical way to have these different universes created on the spot like that would be to have some type of computation that can do a clone very quickly. And that's another reason why the simulation hypothesis ties into quantum physics and this idea of parallel universes. Now, I mentioned my first video game I ever created was Tic-Tac-Toe game, and I played against my brother initially, and then he got bored, so then I tried to create an algorithm that would kind of predict where the best place is to put the X or the O, and that's not very hard to do with tic-tac-toe. But I mentioned Claude Shannon, who was an MIT professor who built a chess-playing computer back in the 1950s. He laid out the basic way that even today a lot of chess-playing computers, at least for many years, they work this way, and they would project each of the possible moves, and then they would evaluate what the ideal situation was, and then they would back up and then go towards that ideal move. And so years later, when I was building more video games and that were trying to basically have all these alternatives in memory and then pick the best one, it reminded me a lot of the parallel worlds theory, in that these are probable worlds that exist as information, and then you can go down the path and actually render whichever one you want. But I think the only practical way for that to happen would to be some type of computational system, some type of computer system that's underlying the entire mechanism.
And so if you did do that, you started at the beginning and you cloned one world and created a new, and you started the same, but in the end you would have totally different worlds because they wouldn't have the same outcomes.
That's right, and that's what chaos theory is all about. It says sensitivity to initial conditions. And if the initial conditions change slightly, so even though they might be the same at step one. Okay, so earlier we talked about this idea of pixelization, and we said, is the world pixelated? Which would make it more like a computer simulation. In computer simulations, you also have this idea of a clock speed in all processors, right? And so a clock speed for a computer chip is the minimal amount of time that you can measure. So you can't go underneath that. So if you're inside a video game that's running on a processor with a clock speed of, say, 1 millisecond, and the numbers are actually way smaller than 1 millisecond, but you cannot measure anything that happens at less than that. And so in a simulation, you have these discrete steps. Now, you can have multiples of that clock speed. So you might say simulate a population of fruit flies. Every step is considered 1 year, where the fruit flies, die and then they reproduce. And you say after 10 years, what's the population of fruit flies? And so this is how chaos theory actually developed, was that even little changes somewhere on step 2 ended up producing a vastly different outcome, down the road. And so that's exactly what could be happening, with these parallel worlds, is that even a small change in steps 2 or 3, and in quantum physics they talk about a very large number, almost infinite set of possibilities and multiverses that are out there. Tying back to lighten up the quantum physics, we tie back to science fiction. There's the CW series The Flash, right? And they always go to Earth 19 and they get characters from Earth 2 and from Earth 19 and recently there was the Enter the Spider-Verse. But this idea has percolated from physics now into popular culture as well. But the question of whether they're real or computed is an interesting one, but if they're all simulated, then I guess it doesn't really matter.
Well, okay, so now you've written a book, you've compiled all of this information, you've researched not only the science, but the religion side and the science fiction side. What have you learned? Is it possible? I asked you earlier if you would upload yourself, right? And you said, probably not, right? You're happy in this world that we live in. But what have you learned? Are we living in a simulation? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think it's not only possible, I think it's probable. It's more likely that what we think of as the physical world is actually a computed world based on information, computation, and algorithms than the materialistic model. I mean, the materialistic model, when you get right down to it and you talk to the physicists, as you look inside the atom, there is no physical object there. It's really a set of relationships and information. And so if that's the case, that sounds so much like the video game world that I've been in. And so as I researched these things, initially it was the spark of it was like a little bit of an idea that this could be serious. But the more I investigated the physics, the more that I investigated the quantum side of it, the more that I looked at quantum computing and how it could be used to simulate the world, I saw the parallels, with these spiritual and religious traditions, which I've also spent a lot of time studying. And so for me, this is the one theory that can bring together these different ways of looking at the universe in the search for truth. So, while we cannot say 100% yes, we are in a simulation, what I've learned is I think it's much more likely that we are in some type of an information-based simulated world than not. I think the model of being in a physical world just doesn't match, many of the findings of either quantum physics or of what we've been hearing from mystics and spiritual traditions. It
certainly answers a lot of questions. When you look at things like not only the question of UFOs or speed faster than speed of light, or it answers all of that because it's a simulation. 1, 2, like us, Homo sapiens sapien, how we just appeared here 200,000 years ago, and we don't match. There is no missing link. There isn't. We just appeared. Well, maybe we're just NPCs in a simulation. Right? Or who built the pyramids? We can't figure that out. Well, if it's just something that's created in a simulation, right? It seems to answer all of those puzzling questions we have about ourselves.
Yeah, and there's a chapter in the book about kind of all this unexplained phenomena, like remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, and UFOs, and how if we're in a simulation, this makes sense. I mean, if you think about UFOs, right, some of the puzzling things for scientists are, there's reports of them just materializing out of nowhere, right? And so the question is, are they physical or are they not? How could they just appear? And then, in my conversations with researchers like Jacques Vallée, he mentioned that sometimes you'll have a case where one person sees the UFO and the other person doesn't.
Right.
It's almost like they're beaming subjective information. Well, turns out in a video game, you and I are rendering the world in our computers or in our own consciousness. It's very possible to beam slightly different information to us so that you see the room or the sky landscape without the UFO and I see it with the UFO there. Like, that's one of the only ways you could kind of explain these types of things.
Like Bigfoot, right? Like Bigfoot.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, you've got all kinds of different. I mean, Bigfoot. Now you're into different genealogies and lineage, and where does it fit into the anthropological?
Well, you really want to take it in a crazy direction. Then we have a phenomenon like Slender Man, right? And if we're living in a simulation, that certainly answers a lot of questions about Slender Man or ghosts or the paranormal,
right? Or UFO abductions, right? I mean, how do they just appear in your room, and how do you end up going through the walls, into a ship? If we look at those stories, and I look at it as, whatever you believe, there should be a model that can explain, how something like that could work. And, I'm an engineer by background, so I like to try to figure out how things work. And, the reason, relativity is accepted today is it was a better model than classical physics for what was actually observed. So I think if you look at many of these areas, these fringe areas, the simulation hypothesis is a better model than, what physicists have been telling us as a physical world. And so, it tends to fit. If it tends to fit, it tends to be a useful model. And therefore, I think it's a better model. And I think more and more people are waking up to it. It's still controversial, right? I mean,
to a point, but you're able to now, you can walk around the halls of MIT and have these ideas about ET or the paranormal, Riz, but just wrap it right into the simulation hypothesis and quantum mechanics, and you're in a safe zone. Right? I mean, you can actually have these conversations.
Right. I can actually have an intelligent conversation with them, with people at MIT, assuming the simulation hypothesis, whereas, if we weren't assuming the simulation hypothesis, people there wouldn't necessarily take that conversation seriously. They take it much more seriously as part of a computational-based model of how the world works, and I'm one of the few people who has experimented with and talk about this stuff. I mean, we did shamanic journeying at the MIT Media Lab, last year, which is not something that normally goes on. So,
so that's why you wrote the book.
Yeah, because I spend part of my time with people in the technological world, in the scientific world, in the video game world, and part of my time with people in kind of these more these other areas. And so this gives me the opportunity to be able to talk to all people on all sides.
So wait a minute, you did a shaman workshop at MIT. Were you guys smoking DMT?
No, we didn't use any peyote or any drugs. It was just using shamanic drumming. It was couched on stress relief for entrepreneurs, and so it was one method. Meditation now and mindfulness is accepted pretty much at MIT and other places as well. So this was yet another way to try to relax people that were stressed out.
An amazing conversation tonight, Riz. And now the book comes out the 31st in a week and a half. In a week and a half.
You can pre-order it now. I mean, it's available on Amazon to pre-order, and it'll be out in a week and a half, right on the 20th anniversary of the Matrix release.
Much success. The book is amazing. I've read it, and I highly, highly, highly recommend the book. And one of the cool things for me about the book is that you do take each one of these approaches to the simulation hypothesis, which is video gaming, computers, science, physics, and of course religion and mythology, and you take each one of those approaches and you break it down comprehensively. It's really well done.
Thank you. Yeah, and I really wanted to explore each of these areas and kind of show how there are very few models that can explain all of these things, and it's one of the few that can do that. And Einstein once said science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind, or maybe it was the other way around, right? But it used to be okay for scientists to talk about religion, and somehow in 500 years we've gone from the church suppressing science to now scientists, in a way, suppressing religion or not taking it seriously. And the simulation hypothesis is a key that unlocks the door to the mysteries of the universe and makes it so that we can talk about it, with people at MIT and Stanford, as well as, on a contact in the desert type of place, right?
Thank you so much, Riz. Amazing conversation tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll speak soon.
Yep. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Riz Virk. And again, it is very easy to get to. Go to zenentrepreneur.com. You can also click on the links over at jimmychurchradio.com. You can pre-order the book now. It is called The Simulation Hypothesis. It's got illustrations broken down. It's really well done. I highly recommend it. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Thank you, Riz Virk. And I'm going to open up the phone lines. Let's go open lines. What do you think? Are we living in a simulation? I'll be right back.
Vivica Fox here, and you are listening to my boy, Jimmy Church, on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter.
But listening to Jimmy Church will.
Hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires. This year we've experienced more than our fair share. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and last month I decided to make sure my family does not have to worry about food should we get caught in a real emergency situation. Introducing Numana, a healthy, storable product that tastes so good that you'll want to eat it every day instead of just during those times of duress. All Numana products have a 25-year shelf life, are MSG and GMO-free, no preservatives, and are made in America. With the Numana pack in your home, you'll be able to sleep at night knowing that you've protected your family. Not only have I tasted and tested, I own it. Now you can too. Just click on the Numana banner on JimmyChurchRadio.com and use the promo code Jimmy when you order. In addition to a discount, we'll send you an autographed Fade to Black t-shirt. Seriously, go Beckley Teppy. This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and I take Life Change Tea supplements every single day. It's what I do. Click on their banner at JimmyChurchRadio.com. When you take the beans from Central America with dashes of Indonesian and African mixed in and then roast it to the dark side of Fade to Black, you create the ultimate brew of fringe. Introducing the Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Yes, River Moon's darkest customized roast was created for the love of Fade to Black. The alchemy of masterful roasting and smoking the beans is in every sip of this full-bodied, dark Java. I need my coffee dark, deep, with distinct bittersweet chocolate highlights, just like the bunker. Leaning further into the darkness of the roast is Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Just click on the banner at JimmyChurchRadio.com and use the promo code F2BBLEND for 15% off of your order today. Go Beckley Teppy.
Hi folks, CBD is the home run hitter for health right now. Why, you ask? Because of what it does for the body. Unfortunately, I can't tell you all about the benefit. You know, there's reasons. Do your due diligence and log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Ancient Life Oil uses organic ingredients and is blended in coconut oil for some of the best benefits. Legal in 50 states and non-psychoactive. Log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and my family is safe because of Numana Emergency Food Storage. Just go to the Numana banner at JimmyChurchRadio.com. Promo code Jimmy10.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
This is Kristen, Erica, Brittany, Gabby, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
It's not a lifestyle we chose. We were born this way. KGRARadio.com.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Welcome back. Fade to Black, open lines right now. 747-228-2051. I want to thank Riz Virk. The book is called The Simulation Hypothesis. Are we living in a simulation? Pretty interesting answer at the end of the show there, where Riz said very highly probable. And he's one of the smartest people on this planet. Let's go to the phones. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Who's calling?
Hey, Jimmy, it's Sandy from Dallas. How you doing?
Hi, Sandy from Dallas. How are you?
Well, listen, I don't get to travel that much, but you all give me the trip of a lifetime right now.
It's pretty cool. Are we living? Yeah, I know, right? Are we living in a simulation, Sandy?
There's got to be something. I can wrap my head around me simulating my own life. I can wrap my head around that. The reason I call is my husband worked on Doom 3, worked in video games his whole life.
Right. Oh, he did. He worked on Doom 3. Was that Arena? Was that, or was that Quake? Quake was Arena. What was Doom 3 called? Or was it just Doom 3? I played it. I just don't remember it, what the title was. But so what did he do for the game? Sandy, are you there? I lost Sandy. Sandy. I lost Sandy. Okay, Sandy, call me back. I've got your number right here. Let's keep the phones going. And 747-228-2051. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Who's calling?
Good evening, Jim. It's Mike in Montana.
Hi, Mike in Montana. How you doing, man?
Pretty good. Is your guest still with?
No, he's gone.
Riz? Oh, well, I was going to say, he's one scary dude.
What's that?
He's pretty scary dude because everything he said is pretty much a possibility. At some point in time, we're going to be faced with, I don't know if the reality of what we're really in, like a matrix system or whatever, but it makes a lot of sense.
Are you okay with it? If it was revealed tomorrow that that's it, we're just NPCs, right? We're just players in a game. Are you okay with it? Well, I mean, what does it change?
Well, I have to say this. I did, at one point in my life when I was very, very young, I was 6, I drowned, and I experienced something I can't explain to other people. I didn't know anything about phenomenon or anything. And what I saw really, really amazed me. I'll just put it that way. And kind of kept me on the straight and narrow for most of my life. But if this is a simulation, what if we're the volunteers? What if we're the ones that volunteered to be here to do this, to experience this in some way, and then in reality, we never really truly died. Maybe we just go on. This is the entertainment. Hey, I'm going to sign up for a 50-year run or a 70-year run on the virtual reality thing, and to them it's 20, 30,000 year beings. Who knows? Maybe we are those beings. It kind of worries me that from what I've seen, if maybe what I saw when I drowned wasn't a part of that simulation, and if it was, it changes everything I think about life.
Yeah, you raised some really good points, Mike. And when you have somebody like Riz, look, I have been studying this for a while, and one of the things that you can do, which is really fun to do, is you can go onto YouTube and punch in simulation hypothesis and start to look at different debates and presentations from scientists, from physicists all around the world, where they are seriously looking into this, and they have their reasons why it is a real possibility. So I would suggest anybody listening to this show right now, after, first, go and get Riz's book. And Mike, I want to thank you for the phone call. Thank you. And get Riz's book. And that's the first thing. And second, just go and start to look at the different scientists around the world that discuss this. It's amazing. And it's when you hear people debate this or talk about this or present their ideas about this inside of our community, that's one thing. And then go and see what others are suggesting here. It's powerful. The material out there is strong. Let's go back to the phones. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Who's calling?
Hey, Jimmy, it's Sandy. Sorry about that.
I thought it was you. I wanted to make sure. All right, Sandy. What did he do for the video game Doom? Doom 3.
He's a 3D computer animator.
And what does he think about us living in a simulation because he's creating him himself.
Oh, he's there. Yeah, he definitely thinks that there is some kind of man behind the curtain, whether it's our own or something. But we also are very, we walk with Jesus. And so we have that also.
What? Okay. I was actually going to go there. What does this do with God? I mean, how does God come into play now?
Well, what we always say when we have discussions about anything that's controversial or whatever, or debate, we always go back to no matter what anyone believes, there's a creator of it all, and we believe it's Jesus. And that's kind of where we leave it.
That's okay. So,
all the greatness and the quantum physics and the genius and the ideas behind it, it came from somewhere to begin with.
The question of faith is a weird thing to mix when you're dealing with ones and zeros and writing code and creating 3D environments.
It is, but he created the people who are writing the code, I believe.
So let's
he
back.
He could have made us go into a simulation, and the reason that we don't die is one thing I subscribe to is because we do have to continue to grow and learn. And now, when you talk about the parallel universes, can't those be the other dimensions, and can they exist? I believe they can, and I believe he created them as well.
Okay, so let's back up a couple of steps. Not in this conversation, but in our timeline. Okay, if we are dealing with an artificial reality, we're living in a simulation that this is created, and we're just role players, right? Okay. Then somebody had to write and create said code and environment. So if we back up further than that, somebody has to come up with the idea and present the project to all of the engineers and code writers.
Oh, I know how far back,
Right. Is that God? Is that who you are saying that God is?
And that's just me, IMO. That I don't push it on anyone, but that's how I walk. Because I push it all back to him, no matter when I start to go, oh my gosh, then I just go, well, you have a plan. If I'm simulated, then I'm simulated. And you know what? If I am simulated and I can wrap my head around that, then I'm going to try and make my simulation better for myself. Because why would we want to live in such misery? We all seem to be so damn miserable.
And that's part of the simulation, right?
And that's ridiculous, then. If that's the fact, then that's a sad thing to be simulating all of us, and all of us to have the same kind of simulation.
Well, okay, and
it goes into that one thing with all the things you don't even need, because you just, there's so many simulations, you could just have that one thing with the zillions of simulations.
But if you look at different games that are out there, like World of Warcraft or Sims, where you have all of those different characters, some are bad, some are good. Sometimes you can play the game and succeed and live a wonderful life. Sometimes you just die. Well, isn't that exactly what we're living with here on planet Earth?
It is.
It's very.
And I just think it's back to trying to make it better.
So I find it.
I don't think we go through these simulations and we've got the bad and the good, and then it goes back to there's the people who are going to just present that bad all the time, and they're the ones who are going to present the good all the time.
Yeah, very fascinating that you would be okay with it.
I don't know where we end it.
Well, why do we, Sandy, let me ask you this. Why do we die then if it's a simulation?
Do you think we die, Jimmy?
We die in the game, right?
Do we?
Yeah, see, fascinating.
Player over, and then at 5 o'clock after dinner, we go and play again.
Right. Sandy, you're smart. What's your husband's name?
Well, do you think we die, Jimmy?
No. I do not. I do not. That would certainly bum me out.
I always wanted to ask you this. Do you think that you turned a corner and became somewhat lighter and open-minded and maybe even a little less empty glass when you met Rita?
Well, when that happens in anybody's life, of course, things change, look, you always, I think that anybody that is successful or finds their bliss or happiness, you don't do that alone, right? And so you need somebody always beside you to not only for support, but to how do I want to say, expose you to other things, and that creates that happiness.
I think in a way we're each other's handlers.
Yeah, I don't think somebody that's found happiness and true bliss does that alone, right? I don't think that. Well, I guess anything is possible, but you know what I'm saying. You're not going to do that alone.
Some of it's got to be with somebody else, in one way, shape, or form.
And what's your better half's name?
Jim.
Jim. Oh,
Jimmy. His name is Jim.
That's what I'm talking about. Sandy, enjoy the rest of your night, and a big shout out to Jimmy. Thank you so much.
All right, God bless. Okay.
Right back at you. So, that the philosophical side of this, the real question is, does it matter? What changes? You still have to wake up tomorrow. You're still going to have to do your things. You're still going to have to find happiness and go and learn and do all of those things that you're obligated to as a person, right? What does it change? That's the question. Let's go back to the phones. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Who's calling?
Chris from Channel Hills.
Hi, Chris from Channel Hills. How are you, man?
Sorry, Chino Hills.
Chino Hills. I was thinking Channel Hills is somewhere out in the Channel Islands. Made sense to me. It made sense to me. Chino Hills, right down the road. How are you?
Great. First-time caller, long-time listener. It's kind of slightly off topic, but hopefully on topic. Any chance you guys are going to get, maybe Tom DeLonge back on the show?
Well, I mean, that do you know how many times a day I get that question, Chris? Do you know
no, it's
a
imagine.
lot. It's a lot. Look, Tom, I think Tom is a really cool dude, and I know that he's a fan of the show. But he also knows that, and I would never be, rude or anything like that to him. But he knows that I've got a long list of questions that I want answered, and I don't think that right now. Because he could come on the show. We could have a wonderful conversation. We can talk about all things TSA and everything that they're working on. But to get to that part of the show, first he's got to stand up and answer a list of questions, of which, Chris, I did email him. I emailed him 10 questions that I want to get to the bottom of. And none of them have been addressed either publicly or privately. And there you go. So I don't think he's prepared to go and do that. And
it just seems like the longer he waits, that list is going to grow, double, triple.
There's
my take on it.
Yeah, that's certainly reality. That's not a possibility. I think that is a reality. But my list of 10 questions is actually pretty old now. If I went back and modified that, it would probably be 50 questions, because a lot of stuff has happened over the last year. But the one thing that I'm thankful for, and I know that Tom listens to this show, the one thing that I'm thankful for is that he's out there pushing the UFO question further out into the public. And one of the things that I really enjoy is the music community out there, which, you look at, say, a band like Blink 182, or you look at, the music community that is out there, or the gaming community, or that the more that we discuss this, we expose and pull them into our community. You know what I mean? And that's what what Tom is tapping into, and I fully appreciate that. His fans have known that he's been into UFOs for a very long time. His band members talk about it and have talked about it in the past, and that's what I'm appreciative of. What I don't like are the mistakes. That's the part that I don't appreciate, and those mistakes look bad back at our community. And if you don't answer to those and let us know why those things happened, then they're just going to linger. It's not going to ever go away.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, Greer is actually one that got me into this whole, I guess, universe, if you will. And I had no idea that Tom DeLonge was even, part of it. And I'm just wondering, is that beef still standing between the two, or are they kind of reconciled, or do you know where it stands at this point?
Yeah, that's a question for Tom and Greer. Okay, what you're talking about, I'll explain this to the audience. That Tom reached out to Dr. Greer many years ago when he started to get into the research of this and our community, and he hung out with Stephen and did some CE5 research with him, and they had a relationship and a friendship. So where that is today, or how those two look at each other, that's a question that needs to be thrown at either one of them. And I think out of respect the two of them have, I think that stuff will probably always stay private. I don't have any insight. Okay, so even if I did, I wouldn't say it on this show. But I
mean, I admire both of them, and it's hopefully, obviously, they can come to an understanding that we're all in this together. We're fighting for, I think, the same cause. That's to bring disclosure to the forefront.
Well, I'll say this, Chris, and specifically talking about Tom and Dr. Greer. Those two are unique right now in our UFO community, and I'll tell you why. I truly believe, I really do, forget about the sensationalism when it comes to Dr. Greer and his claims and flying around the world with the royal families of whatever and CIA directors. Put all of that stuff aside. I know, I believe that Stephen is exposed and knows things that would blow our minds that he doesn't talk about and that he can't talk about. I really believe that. Okay, so
I'm sure. I definitely believe that too.
And it's the same thing with Tom. I truly believe, right, that Tom actually knows things. I do. He's way too exposed into the inner workings, just like Dr. Greer is. But I have the same issues with the both of them, and that is this: if you are truly in possession of the knowledge, and I do believe that both of them are, then come forward. Don't continue with, you guys can't handle the real truth. We need to handle it this way. We're going to discuss it in this fashion. We can't. Too many things will get upset, and we'll expose this person or this organization, and then this is going to happen with society. You know what? Screw all that. Screw it. If you are in possession with the real stuff, bring it. Bring it. If I had it, right? If I had some top secret stuff, I'm yapping. I'm yapping. I'm going out.
So would I. I mean, Greer tapped into something. I mean, I've tried a CE5 protocol and it works. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and it just goes to show you. I mean, obviously he was. I don't know the backstory about it. He somehow communicating with ET, and they went over this protocol and developed it together. But who knows where that came from? But his method works. I've tried it. I mean, a handful of times, and it's just crazy what's out there, and they really just need to bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, Chris, the CE5 protocol, which I've done with Costas Macraeus and his wife. I think this is my take. All right, this is just my own personal experience, that there is something going on with that at a consciousness level. There is something going on within the ether, and you're letting something out there know that you want contact, and whether it's ET or something interdimensional, it's us from the future. I don't know what it is, but certainly things appear. And I don't think you necessarily need to. In fact, I know you don't, to follow the CE5 protocols by the book, and do a ceremony.
No, not at
all. All you got to do is show the intent. Because I go out there and trust me, I am the opposite of CE5. I'm loud. I'm stupid.
I think I've heard you say that before.
Ask anybody that's done it with me. Right? It's just about being happy, open-minded, and wanting something to happen. And I'm telling you, man, I've been out there with a couple of hundred people, and we've lit up the skies. And I could go out in my backyard here in Burbank and look up and see nothing, but in the same sky, 50 miles away, and going out, it's the same stars, it's the same thing, it's the same stuff, and suddenly we're lighting up the skies with craziness. I can't explain that, but I think it's about intent. And just letting them know that you're cool and that you're here to have some fun, and that's my take.
I totally agree. I mean, Chino Hills is, you're probably kind of familiar with it. It's somewhat densely populated, and I've done it in a neighborhood, and, things appeared, and I guess, for whatever reason, they felt that it was okay to do so, but I did notice an increase in helicopter activity the weeks following that. So
yeah, very
I don't know if there's any
interesting.
connection, or it was just kind of odd coincidence right there.
Man, I've got my night vision goggles right here in the bunker. I think I'm going to take them home with me tonight and go jump in the backyard for a few minutes.
There you go.
All right, Chris. Hey, man, first-time caller, man. Don't be a stranger. Thank you so much.
Hey, no problem, Jimmy. And one more thing. Can you take me out Gobekli Tepe style?
Gobekli Tepe, Chris.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you, man. Have a good night.
All right, too. Thanks.
Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe. I found my that Mate Meyer sent us. I found the Gobekli Tepe T-shirts. They were in a drawer, and I've got to start wearing those again. Man, those things are too cool. Yeah, as I wind down here, I do want to thank Riz Virk for an amazing conversation tonight. When it comes to the simulation hypothesis, I left something out, and we didn't go there tonight, and I don't know why we didn't. It kept popping in, and that is Tron. Okay, Tron, especially the part 2 and the remake were pretty cool, but the original Tron. Now, what a futuristic look that was into the simulation hypothesis, right? Think about that for a second. But the movie Tron was something else, like The Matrix, where I watched it over and over again. I had the videotape for Tron, and I went through a couple of months where I watched that nearly every single day. And this was in the 80s. Got my first VCR, got a copy of Tron, and I watched it over and over again. And I started to ask some of those fundamental questions in watching Tron. In that, would I do it? I thought it was pretty exciting, right? The possibility of living like that on a motherboard in a chipset with other computer programs, right? And that was like the precursor for The Matrix. and the simulation hypothesis, if you think about it. And it started for me a path down a road that I'm actually very comfortable with. Would you know the difference if you were living? Do you remember the first time that what's his name, Floyd, where he shows up and he's looking at his hands and he's wondering, he's looking around. He was okay with it. What did it change in his life, right? But it takes out the other questions, those questions of disease, right? You know, getting sick, sleep, and certainly mortality. All of that comes into play. What a great conversation tonight. Thank you, Riz Virk. The book is called The Simulation Hypothesis. All you have to do is go to his website, zenentrepreneur.com. The links are at jimmychurchradio.com. Just click and head straight there. Pre-order the book. It's releasing on the 20th anniversary of the release of The Matrix on March 31st in about 10 days. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Camarion. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intros, Spaceboy, SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and syndication is KGRA The Planet. This broadcast is only copyrighted 2019 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Until tomorrow night, Doctors JJ and Desiree Hertok, right here on Fade to Black. Everybody be safe. Go Beckley Tappy.